Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Had a Regeneration Quirk? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. He laughed in maniacal delight as he danced in the crimson flames, courting death. He flirted, kissed, even embracing death's forlorn figure, hoping that it would take him away. But he knew it was all in vain. He could never cross the border, forever trapped in the possessive grip of life and all of its spun-up web of lies. Forever dragged away from the sweet, entwining embrace of his star-crossed lover. He danced until the world went black. How did this even happen? 4 years old and his life was already ripped away from his grasp, tossed into the gutter. Quirkless. That's what the doctor diagnosed, his voice dripping in false sympathy. Quirkless. That's why his own mother clung to him with her overbearing, suffocating regret as she blamed herself for his crippled state, when all he begged for was assurance that he could still amount to something in this reality, that he could become a hero. Quirkless. The reason why his father sent only a printed note, telling the broken family that he's not coming home. Quirkless. When his closest friend, someone he considered a brother and a hero, to start spending every day making his life a living hell. Worthless. Waste of space. Pathetic. Quirkless. Oh god. They were right. Bakugo Katsuki despised the quirkless trash he used to call a friend. He had taken it as his personal mission to make the Deku give up on becoming a hero. It was a stupid FING dream that would never happen. Being the #1 hero was his FING goal, and Deku's worthless but didn't deserve to tarnish it. He was better than the good for beach. He was better than everyone. He had cornered the scrawny little beach on the roof, his lackeys behind him, laughing and egging him on. After his usual beating, he gripped both of his hands on Deku's thin shoulders and shoved, willing his explosions to fling Deku's silent, weak body crashing into the wall. Laughing with his lackeys, he walked away, locking the door behind him with the key that he had stole. Slipping a final gift underneath the door, he yearned for tomorrow to come quicker and for the sea whale to repeat. He didn't notice the dulled, long-dried eyes of the Deku, staring far off into nothing as they beat him to the ground methodically, or the mottled skin bruising and swelling underneath his torn-up uniform. He didn't notice the sliver of a smile that etched into the smaller boy's pale, marble face when they said that he was better off dead. He didn't realize that Deku had already given up on being a hero a long, long time ago. That he didn't even have the will to live anymore. At the delicate age of 12, Izuku's pale wrists were already riddled with ugly, ugly scars. He had hidden them with worn-out, all-might pattern wristbands that he had purchased with the little pocket money he had years ago and long sleeves. Staring at them now, he could see the lighter, fading cuts and wondered why he even started cutting. His eyes glistened with unshed tears. Every slash had gotten deeper over time. The thin, slivers of grazes had now escalated to a point where he had to physically restrain himself from stabbing out his veins like a crazed killer. He sat on the very edge of his 7-story middle school building, legs dangling over the sides as he stared off into the setting sun. He pondered, what if he had died, right here, right now? What if he threw himself off the edge and splattered into a sea of gory red and crushed bones? Would it hurt? Does it even matter? Nobody would miss him. Bakugo Katsuki would just sneer and say good riddance while the whole school laughs along with him. The heroes and police wouldn't care about losing another worthless piece in their perfect chessboard of a society. Only his mother would grieve for him, but in the long run, it was better for everybody if he dies. He would finally make himself useful by not existing. This wasn't the first that he had these thoughts. Smiling dryly at the comforting thought, he dwelled on the fantasy before reluctantly getting up and trudging his way to the door. Perhaps another time. It was locked. Typical. Under the rusting door was his missing notebook, ripped apart and rolled in dirt. Hero analysis for the future. He gingerly picked up the notebook and looked inside. Every page was torn apart and graphitized on. Quirkless. The middle page was clearly Bakugo's handwriting. If you want to be a hero so bad, then just take a swan dive off the roof and hope for a quirk in your next life. Izuku could only laugh at his shitty fate. He tried to cry. Desperately tried to feel the pain and despair, but everything was so numb he wondered if he was even alive in the first place. Why does he even try? The universe really did want him to do it. He was finally over the edge. Well, majority wins. He walked over to the edge and tossed the notebook off without hesitation. Pages upon pages of his ruined dreams scattered in the breeze. He grinned with a mocking laugh, but the expression didn't reach his eyes. Striding a measured 8 feet away from his sweet death, removing his signature red high-top sneakers, he took a run-up, feeling alive for the first time in years, and flung himself off the edge, twisting his body so that he could stare at the golden sunset for the last time. I really should do this more often, was his only thought as he plummeted to his death. Finally, Midoriya Hisashi lit a cigarette, taking a long drag as he unknowingly turned the corner, walking past his estranged son's school gates. The last time he had been in Japan was around 6 years ago. Nostalgia rippled through his dulled system as his lips quirked up by a fraction. He hadn't seen his wife or his son in 12 years, not that he was planning to break that streak. There really wasn't a reason for this late afternoon stroll of his, only that he had finished the recruiting process far too early. Japan had been thoroughly disappointing in their terms of potential. Nobody really stood out like they used to. A dull thump stopped him in his tracks. It came from around the back of the building behind the middle school gates that he was about to walk past. Curiosity kills the cat, Hisashi thought as he sneaked past the school's gate, choosing to walk in the blind spots of the security cameras and windows to trace the source of the sound. A child lied in the empty, concrete courtyard. His thin, pale limbs bending in awkward positions and blood pooling around his cold body like a pair of scarlet wings. His lips, torn from what Hisashi assumed was an old habit, curled upwards. He was smiling. How very strange indeed. His forest green hair, curly and wild, was completely stained in red. Hisashi frowned. The child held an uncanny resemblance to his wife. The freckles that were scattered across his nose and cheeks grew more prominent as the blood continued to blossom, staining his leather shoes. His half-lidded eyes were glazed over and dulled, but it was a clear, emerald green. Wait. Oh hell. The boy was Midoriya Izuku, his biological son. He would recognize these eyes anywhere. Midoriya Hisashi was honestly at a loss of what to do. Either leave his own son and let the authorities find him, or call an ambulance and be questioned on his identity. He chose the first option, turning his back on his son and started to walk away with a heavy heart, only to hear a slight groan. He spun around. The blood under his shoes were gone, retracting itself. Midoriya Hisashi stared in perplexity as the blood floated back to the corpse as if by sheer magnetic force. Bone snapped back into place as the blood reversed itself, forcing its way back into the pale body before the skin closed up the cuts, leaving nothing but a scar. Finally, the boy's spine straightened itself out with a bone-chilling pop and he sat up slowly. Back from the dead. Midoriya Izuku woke up, which was disappointing to say the least. His vision refocused as the pounding pressure coursing through his body faded. He looked up and saw a man staring down at him. What the F dash dot? He was dead. For a good minute everything of foggy and out of reach. He could feel his life force drain away as the excruciating, frigid pain swallowed his mind. Emptiness. No longer suffocated. His state of consciousness was muddled up and everything was a haze, kind of like a permanent lucid dream. His vision returned to him, and found himself gazing into the clear gray eyes of an ethereal woman. She was an unearthly beauty. Ebony black hair tickled his face as she leaned down to return his gaze. Holy shit. His head was resting on her lap. But he didn't blush, panic, or try to move away. Somehow, the woman seemed familiar. So familiar. The aura she held seemed to seep like shadows into the floor. It suddenly clicked. She was death. But there was something about her cool fingers tracing his tear-ridden cheeks that relaxed him. A gift. To my dear Korra. Her voice like tinkering glass, and Izuku closed his eyes automatically as she pressed bipedal-soft lips against his eyelids. He decided to stay. It was an endless landscape. He sat cross-legged in the middle of a field of pure white daisies next to the silent woman, her elegant marble features etched into a charming smile as they stared up at the inky, pitch-black sky that cannot be normal. Izuku wondered if he was going to stay like this for the rest of eternity. His erratic breathing slowed and the violent, thrashing thoughts pounding in his head were deadly silent. For the first time, he finally felt at peace with himself. He was content to lie there forever, staring up at the inky sky. This was his happy place, next to her. He exhaled. Before he was literally ripped out of his dreamscape like a page in a notebook and shoved back into his physical body. The last thing he saw was the woman's wistful look, almost like she knew this was going to happen before his vision went white. Everything didn't fit. His brain couldn't control his strangely not broken limbs for a few split seconds. His limbs ached like hell and his spine crackled and popped as he forced himself up. Disassociated confusion caused through his veins, but the only clear thought that stood out in his head was, he wanted to die again. He wanted to feel peace again. I want to see her again. The serenity, as short as it may have been, was worth every bit of the agony in dying. Tenfold. He was addicted. His vision refocused as the pounding pressure coursing through his body faded. He looked up and saw a man staring down at him. How long has he been standing there for? Hi. Izuku couldn't help but grimace. His voice could only be described as nails against a chalkboard. The man took a desperate drag of his half-burnt cigarette, chest heaving as he inhaled the smoke before speaking. What's your name? The tall man's voice was controlled and carefully blank, but Izuku could hear the strain. His suit was custom-tailored, showing the toned frame underneath, and his raven hair was slicked back, revealing narrow, dark slit eyes like a snake. Freckles dusted his marble-carved face and his lips were set in a grim line. Izuku Midoriya, sir. He really saw no point in lying. The man stayed silent for a long time, giving Izuku more time to grasp his situation. He had jumped off a 7-story building and he was still alive. Wait, no. He died and came back to life. Somewhere inside him a small voice was celebrating in delight. He had a quirk. He wasn't quirkless. He wasn't useless. But the rest of him was crying in a pit of despair. It wasn't a quirk, he just can't die. Comes right back. The sweet release of death was only temporary. He was as good as useless. He couldn't even stay dead, he couldn't even comfort her. But, is there a limit to how many times he can die? Was there a time limit to how long he can stay dead? Is there some way to kill himself permanently? The last question got him to move. He picked himself up with great effort and started to make his way back into the building with newfound determination. The man silently followed him, occasionally letting out puffs of smoke and keeping to the corners as they both walked up the stairs again. Bakugo Katsuki had left the key on the last staircase to the roof as an unintentional gift of sorts. Izuku picked it up calmly and unlocked the cold metal frame, letting the lazy warm breeze ruffle his hair. He walked to the edge, still sensing the man behind him. He turned around and tilted his head questioningly. Is there anything you need from me, sir? The man just gazed into Izuku's eyes as he dropped the butt of his cigarette and snuffed out the flames with his shiny leather shoes, hands in pockets. I am currently recruiting new members for an international company. You seem to have just the right potential. Izuku was only half listening, yearning to feel his happy place again. We can provide you anything you need and want to test your quirk. That caught his attention. Izuku was cautious and decided to tread lightly. I'm sorry, sir, but I don't know what you're talking about. I'm quirkless. Bullshit. So the man did witness his leap of faith. Izuku considered the incredibly shady offer. His mind briefly flashed to his poor mother and realized that she would only hold him back from dying to meet her. She would want to keep him safe. Keep him alive. He thought about Bakugo, his never-ending torture, and how much worse it would get knowing that they can't physically break him. He realized that nobody would ever care how much he hurt or broke. Quirk or not, the world didn't need useless people like him taking up space. Deal. The man reached out his left hand, and python tattoo encircling his hand and disappearing under his sleeves. Izuku accepted, gripping the man's stone-cold skin. Just like that, his fate was sealed. A deal with the devil to meet death. But first. Izuku stared into the fold of the man's suit. You'll have to prove your conditions. The man hesitated before nodding briefly. Izuku happily skipped to the ledge of the building bare feet. Spreading his slim arms for an open embrace, the man complied. He unclipped the shotgun from the folds of his suit and aimed point blank at his forehead. Hey sir. Thank you. Hey Shuto. The dual-haired boy dodged a butterfly kick to his head by an inch. He didn't falter, waiting for the right moment like a predator before sweeping the opponent off his feet as soon as he landed and caught him in a tight, figure-4 chokehold. Yeah. Shuto gazed down at his sparring partner. Violet hair pinned back but strands of wild hair still sticking up at odd angles, forehead glistening with beads of sweat. Something tells me that Mr. Hisashi's gonna bring back a new recruit today. Hitoshi patted his thigh and Shuto released the pressure. Shuto stood up as the tired boy spread-eagled on the ground, breathing for breath. What makes you so sure? He picked up 2 water bottles on the side of the circular sparring ring and tossed one at Hitoshi. I don't really know. Just a gut feeling, I guess. He plucked the bottle from the air, sitting up with great effort before uncapping the water and chugging the whole thing down. Shuto absent-mindedly nodded, checking his phone for new notifications. One message popped up. Shachuo's lips quirked up just a fraction. Well, your intuition is usually correct. Shuto strolled back to Hitoshi and offered a hand. Come on. Mr. Hisashi is waiting for us in the lobby. Hitoshi gripped the outstretched hand, taking in his cool touch and pulled himself up. We'll see. We'll see. He grinned mischievously, mauve eyes glistening with excitement. Heterochromatic eyes gazed fondly at his childish expression. They made their way out of the gym, locking the behind them and strolled down to the lobby in comfortable silence. Sure enough, beside Mr. Hisashi was a thin, freckled, green-haired boy around the same age as them, crystal gray eyes boring into both Shuto and Hitoshi. Untrusting. His name was Izuku. He was the new recruit. 3 years. 3. Years. And Hitoshi still has a heart attack every time he opens the door to his dorm. His, Shuto and Izuku's dorm to be exact. And as of late, Izuku has taken his hobby far too close to home. Yo Zuki, have you seen my, what the F dash? Izuku looked up from the leather-bound back that he had definitely stolen from somewhere, calm, cool silver eyes regarding him. What's up, dude? Hitoshi had regained some composure, a lot quicker than he would have in the past. Don't give me that sheet. Put the FNG knife away. The greenette frowned but reluctantly obeyed, putting the book down and tearing out a curved blade that he had deeply embedded into his stomach. Slowly, bloody red blossomed, drenching his clean white shirt. Within literal seconds, the blood reversed itself like a playback button had been pushed, seeping back into the wound before the skin started to stitch itself over, leaving not even a scar behind. The greenette spread his arms like that solved the problem. Happy? You gotta stop doing that in here, Zuki. Then why don't you just order me to instead of screaming bloody murder every time you open the DMN door? Because apparently, my orders are revoked every time you die. Which means I'll have used my quirk on you at least once a day so that you will stop doing this shit here. That's so sad. Alexa, play Despacito. I swear to the god dash. The doors opened and Shuto walked in. He had dyed his right side from pure white to a inky, gloss black around 2 years ago. His right side was pinned back with crisscrossed red bobby pins, leaving his fiery red hair to cover a bit of his floral tattoo over the burn and his clear turquoise eye. He raised an eyebrow and smirked in amusement at his bickering roommates. As much as I enjoy your little arguments, we got work to do. The smirk grew into a chilling grin. It's time to go hunting. Pure terror coursed through his veins, the pulsating thump in his heart almost outweighing the deafening screams of pain that came from behind the door. Keep calm, 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 keep. He was going to be okay. 1,000 trained bodyguards should be enough to take down 3 mere brats. But he was wrong. So very wrong. Silence. What happened? The oak doors swung open to reveal 3 hooded figures in black and red. I got 305. SCK. I got 306 inch. That means I won then, dumbass. Yeah, but you cheated. Wasn't my fault you got distracted. Yeah, keep telling yourself that. The 3 finally turned their attention to the cowering fat man in a 3-piece white suit. Well, hello there, Mr. Leader. Sorry to say, but you're going to have to come with us. The shortest of the 3 spoke, an odd and distilling voice following a layered melody as he aimed a pistol at his forehead. Please spare me. The grown man shed crocodile tears as he wailed, throwing himself down at the figure's feet. He can survive without his pride. The figure laughed, a tinkering sound of glistening bells as a sudden pain and a sharp crack in his ribs knocked the wind out of him. He curled up in agony. Don't make this hard on yourself. Sir. The world went black. He slowly regained consciousness, opening his eyes to a dim, blood-stained dungeon. He took in the scenery around him. Feral, desperate scratches carved into the concrete wall, dried blood splattered like paint all over the floors. The wretched stench of puke and rotted flesh clung to his nose. You're finally awake then. Real tears streamed down the poor man's face. Hey, don't cry now. I got a surprise for you. Look down. Pulsating out of his stomach was a glacial blade dripping in crimson red. Eyes widened in panic. Breathing hitched. Blood overflowed. It hurts, 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 it hurts. He screamed. He died screaming. Well, that was severely underwhelming. You know, sheet. Shut up, you sarcastic little f dash dot. I know you love me. Damn it. Hey Maria, yeah, it's me again, can we get someone to clean up room 4A? It's not that bad, I swear, only one body. No, we just need someone to take away the corpse. No explosives were used. I was in charge this time. No, Zuki didn't do any experiments. Shoulda made sure to keep it as clean as possible. Okay, thank you, sweetie. Say hi to the rest of your girls for me. Hitoshi sighed as he ended the call. I swear, one of these days the cleanup department is going to murder us. Izuku just scoffed, changing out of his blood-stained hoodie and tossed it at Hitoshi's face with deadly accuracy. He pulled out a black, knitted V-neck sweater from the closet and put it on, the low neckline showing of his heavily bandaged torso and a pair of lightly ripped jeans. Their dorm had 3 identical single beds, desks, bookshelves, windows, and even a sectioned wardrobe on the far side of the room. Over the years, Izuku had taken up most of the bookshelf with messy notes and heavy books. Shoulda liked to keep his area, in between Hitoshi and Izuku, minimalistic, all neutral colors and neat folders on his corner of the shelf. A well-made bed with crisp, clean sheets and a few music notation posters pinned on the wall. White roses flourished in a glass vase, sitting on his windowsill. He's currently sitting on his study desk, taking long drags of his cigarette and breathing the smoke out the open window. He was calm, tilting his head out into the open air and staring off into the pinky, late afternoon clouds. Hitoshi's space was the exact opposite, punk vibes all around. Collages of ripped-up, dark posters of unheard, underground bands and graphitized over with spray paint lined his section of the wall. cases overflowing with vinyl CDs strewn across the floor along with crumpled-up hoodies and high-top sneakers. He was spread-eagled on his bed, playing a hella old video game on the console that Zuki and Shudo had got him for Christmas as he listened to music through headphones, humming pleasantly to the musical soundtracks, surprisingly. Izuku took up the far left side of the room, overcrowded with stacks upon stacks of brimming binders, diaries, sketch pads and hardback volumes, already taking over most of the shelving space in the room. Rough drafts, annotations, vivid diagrams, blueprints and fingerprints were all tacked to his wall, giving off a spontaneous, mad scientist impression. His desk was a chaotic murder scene. Vials of strange and incomprehensibly colored liquids were propped up against the wall with tags written in messy, cursive printing. Neon and iridescent stains charred into the wooden desk, peeling paint and layers away from the surface. The greenette is propped up on his elbows, lying on Hitoshi's floor, his round-rimmed glasses resting haphazardly on his nose as he focused on tapping away on his self-updated computer, probably hacking some country's border security. Or playing chess, it was hard to tell. These were the moments that made life really worth living, or staying alive for. The deeper comprehension that glued the three together had formed over during the endless days that they had spent by each other's side. Training, and sharing their painful past. Fighting, and arguing over petty disagreements. Killing, whether it be missions or personal reasons. Dying. On more than one occasion. They were inseparable. Shudo had been the first recruit. He was only 5 years old and had jumped out of the window of a hospital. His right eye burned like hell under the bandages. He trudged through the crowds of people on the streets for hours with no purpose. Nowhere to go. Nobody helped him. Finally exhausted, he curled his bruised and aching body up into a small ball on the park bench, head pressing against his tucked-in bloody knees. He waited for his father's company to find him, to take him home. Shudo couldn't help with tear-up. His father was going to hurt him even more. But they didn't. The only one that had approached him was a tall, raven-haired man with snake-like eyes. "Hey kid." The man took a seat next to him, lighting up a cigarette with a tiny flame that he had conjured up in his other hand and tilting his head up to face the sky, breathing out the smoke leisurely. They stayed in silence. Finally, the man spoke. "What happened to your eye, kid?" "What happened?" My mum poured hot water on me." The harsh reality hit him like a bus. He broke down sobbing. His mother hated him. His father was obsessed with making him the best hero, even better than All Might. What was the point? He didn't want to be a hero. He never asked to be a hero. The man just hummed. "What about your dad?" The little boy flinched violently, fear coursing through his single gray eye. "Well, it's getting dark, kid, so you better run on home." "I don't have a home." Despite his trembling state, the child forced the sentence out with such intensity, hate, and bloodlust. Midoriya Hizashi couldn't help but grin. "If you really don't have a home, why don't you come with me?" "Huh." Hizashi stood up and brushed off the ashes. He turned around to look at the small child. He could see the potential burning like a hellfire in Endeavor's sun. He reached out a gloved hand. Too bad the flaming imbecile didn't know how to use it. He watched the dual-haired child hesitate for a split second before a determined expression swallowed the doubt in his eye. The child grasped his hand and didn't let go. The next day, there was no report on the number 2 hero's youngest son. His records were completely wiped. All CCTV footage non-existent in both the public and on private property. There was no trace of Todoroki Shudo left. It was like he didn't exist in the first place. A text right before midnight summoned the trio to the main gates of their dorms. Not that they were complaining, of course. None of them actually sleep on a daily basis. Shudo's a really light sleeper, so he always stays up to an ungodly hour with the other two and can somehow function on half an hour of sleep for a week without falling into a coma or hell. Hitoshi has a very severe case of insomnia as well as being a full-time night owl. Coffee shots and passing out in the daylight was his routine. But if Hitoshi was bad, then Izuku needs another scale to measure his sleeping habits. The boy barely closes his eyes and can stay awake and functioning for eternity. His hobby reverts his body back into its prime condition and is the equivalent of getting an 8-hour rest in 5 minutes. The trio kept to the shadows of the corridor, dressed up in the standard uniform. New mission, 113. Location, Japan, Yokohama Kamino District. Report to the main gates. Your ride is waiting. Jiren stood in front of the pitch-black iron gates, waiting for the soldiers he requested to arrive. His hands couldn't stop shaking, so he opted for shoving them in his pockets as he checked his surroundings like a frightened animal. He knew this was risky. The only reason why there wasn't a bullet through his heart or poison running through his veins is because they owed him a favor. Why did he even agree to do this? Was the solid gold paycheck really worth dying for? Sensei only wanted to hire the top-notch weaponry to see what his creepy BSTRD of a pupil, Shigaraki Tamura, would do with them. He would have died for nothing. It's a pleasure to meet you, sir. The sudden voice jolted him out of his own internal spiral. How did they manage sneak up on him? The three figures were dressed in all black and armed to the teeth. They all wore a similar uniform, dark, patched-up jeans, overly large black hoodies and steel combat boots laced up to their shins. Their masks and weaponry were completely different though. The shorter, more feminine-built eyes and hair were obscured by the hood, but they bore a plain black surgical mask that covered up the lower part of their face. Slung around their hips were multiple strapped-on holsters, visible gradient blades catching the light like mirrors as they moved. The splattered X mark in red taking up their entire torso was the only pop of color. Bandages covered their neck and slim fingers as they stood in front of the other two figures. The two taller silhouettes were obviously male. The first one's mask covered his eyes like a bandage and splattered with an X mark in similar fashion to the other one. He didn't have any visible weapons, but small vials of strange neon liquids glowed from his thigh holsters and the rings around his fingers. His dual-colored hair parted messily and the red side pinned back with pins. The last out of the three had guns wore a similar mask to the first one, his branded X mark smeared over his covered mouth. The only visible weapons were the two shotguns hanging from his sides. His violet hair slicked back with gel, showing off his toxic mauve pupils. You are our contractor, I assume? The shorter one spoke. Even from the quality of their voice, he still couldn't define the gender. Yes. Our ride should be here any second now. Your names are King, Joan. For it. Jiren was about to question the last one's response but decided that he liked his head better where it was. The warped gate materialized in front of them just in time. The trio stepped through without a second though, followed by Jiren. He could sense their killing intent seeping through their hoodies. He gulped. The warped gate transported them into a bar. Mahogany tables, leather booths and a variety of alcohol and liquor perched on top of the shelves. A man completely comprised of dark purple swirling shadows wore a bartender suit and polished a glass with gloved fingers. He looked absolutely fascinating. Izuku beelined past all the other clusters of strange-looking people. He didn't need to look back at his partners to know that they were following him. Hello, sir. He trained his frigid gray eyes on the shadow's movement. His pattern. How does he remain in one piece? The collar? How long does it for him to dissipate? Can he turn his quirk off? Is there a limit to how many people he can teleport? Can he kill me? You must be the people Jiren brought in. Izuku felt hands on both his shoulders, mildly restraining him. He felt a chilling breath down his back. Shudo. Yes. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Dash. Kurojiiri. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Kurojiiri. My name is Kore and this is King. Izuku gestured at Toshi. And this is Joan. He placed his bandaged hand over Shudo's icy grip. We look forward to working with you, Mr. Kurojiiri. The three hooded figures sat at the bar stools, listening to the man with a hand, gripping in his face and his rambling video game references. Only Hitoshi seemed to understand, nodding along and translating the mixture of insults and game controls into a somewhat coherent plan of attacking the hero school. In order to smite All Might, apparently. All Might. Now that's a name he hasn't heard of in ages. The crowds of petty criminals trailed out of the bar in order to collect weapons and regroup in a few hours tops. The only people left was the gamer guy, the trio, the bartender, a tall guy with scars under his eyes and entire jaw, as well as a blonde girl in a sailor uniform. Kurojari, why the F is these brats here? Gamer dude started to scratch his neck, pieces of skin flaking off like snow. Jiren brought them in, Tamura. The shadow continued to polish the glass while his glowing yellow eyes gazed coolly at the gamer guy. Speaking of which, the man that had met them had seemingly vanished into thin air. You guys look so cool and mysterious. The blonde girl bobbed her head up and down excitedly. The scarred male just inclined his head towards Hands dude, completely ignoring the newcomers. We have around 4 hours to spare, boss dude. Great, now F off. I gotta beat the new Lev. Boss to warm up. Do whatever the F you want and don't get you but arrested. With that, the blue silver-haired guy waved them off, dissipating through a violet shadowy gate that had definitely not been there before. I didn't know he cared so much, Patchwork Boy's tone dripped in sarcasm. Well, anyway. He turned towards the still-seated trio, the middle one sipping on a neon green drink. Dobby raised an eyebrow. Absinthe? That sheet is like 70% pure alcohol. The trio faced him casually, their face completely hidden under their hoodies and masks. So who are you guys anyway? Half and half sitting to the right answered with a tone flat as cardboard. We're professional contract. Mercenaries. The other two just nodded along. Silence. Oh god, this is going to get awkward real fast. Quick. Icebreaker. Quick. Well, since you guys got time to spare and nowhere to go, wanna come and commit petty crimes with us? He tilted his head at Toga lazily. Violet Boy and dual-haired dude all shrugged and looked at their partner, waiting for their answer. To which the mysterious person responded with chugging their entire drink in one shot. Dobby could almost see the feral grin raking their face under the mask. Sure. It'll be fun. Stepping out of the bar gave Izuku more whiplash than that one time he crashed his motorcycle into a moving bus in a street race. On a highway. Fun times. They had been transported in the dead of the night into the bar, but it was actually around 9 in the morning in Japan. Izuku took in the scenery around him. It was a bad neighborhood, but he's seen a lot worse. Everyone wandering on the streets avoided them like the plague, even crossing the street and running the opposite direction as soon as they spotted the teenage gang. They walked and chatted for around 15 minutes like it was the most natural thing. So you're telling me that you burnt 4 buildings, multiple people and a forest down without getting caught? Hitoshi's eyes widened in surprise. Yeah, I know. Heroes here are pretty FNG incompetent. Patchwork Boy, or Dobby, as he had introduced himself as while they were walking, broke into an idle smirk. Yeah, I once stabbed a guy in an alley and a hero walked past without even noticing. Blondie/Toga Himiko giggled uncontrollably as she skipped along the narrow footpath. Hitoshi chatted along with the villains while Izuku and Shudo strolled behind leisurely, Shudo pulling out a packet of unopened cigarettes and offered them to everyone. Only Izuku took one. Shudo clicked his left hand and a small, burning flame conjured up on his gloved index finger. He lit the end and inhaled the smoke casually. Izuku leaned into Shudo, body pressing against his arm, lighting his own. He pulled his mask down and found comfort in the nicotine. Aren't you guys a bit too young to be smoking? Aren't you a bit too burnt to be this salty? Shudo didn't miss a beat. Blondie snorted as they turned into an unmarked alleyway on the edge of town. All right. Dobby dropped the bag slung over his shoulder and hit the ground with a metallic clunk. He knelt down, unzipped the bag and tossed spray cans at the trio and Toga. Art is alive. Let's paint the FNG town red. Despite of what people might think or say about Dobby and all his rebellious attitude, nobody could deny his artistic talent that flowed through in the form of illegal graffiti. It was just a hobby though. One of the many he picked up after running away from his own home. When he paints, he doesn't think. No more violent emotions threatening to boil over. No more bitterness and hatred clinging to his shadows, dragging him down. Just him and the can of color in his hands. He was completely focused on his section of the wall. Blockout colors first followed by shades and highlights, layering them up more and more. His scarred hands were stained in an endless black and brilliant gold by the time he was done. A pair of hyper-realistic human eyes etched into the fading red brick wall. Metallic gold veins pumped through the whites as inky black blood dripped from the wide, crazed gold pupils. "We're coming for you," sprawled in erratic red stains left goosebumps down his spine. He looked over at Toga. Watching her slash bloody red, probably not paint, in her own space, her face unusually neutral and focused on not getting any red on Dobby's piece. He grinned a little at her concentration. She was thoughtful like that. Toga Himiko was the first stray he picked up after he left home. His first friend. His body was weak and bruised, infections crawling under his freshly charred skin. He slouched against the wall of an unmarked alleyway, body obscured by the dumpsters from passing pedestrians' line of sight. Not that they would have cared at all. His throat constricted with hate as he blinked the tears out of his eyes desperately. Nobody was going to help him. Nobody cared. He leaned against the wall for support, staring up at the monochrome clouds through a foggy veil of his own tears. Not even his own family. A sudden, stifled sob followed by uneven, panicked breaths resonated in the alleyway, snapping him out of his daily depressive episode. Pushing himself up and wandering over to find the source of the noise, he literally stumbled over a blonde little girl. Her sailor uniform and overlarge cardigan was stained in blood. So much blood. He flinched, instinctively backing away. But as she continued to sob helplessly, Tuya studied her more carefully. Her stockings were ripped apart and in tatters against her legs. Her shirt under the cardigan was clearly torn and her bright red ribbon hung too tightly around her pale neck. Her ashy blonde hair covered in grime and knots cascaded down to her hips. She looked pitiful. Pathetic even. She was what he saw every time he catches his own reflection in shop windows and public bathrooms. He felt his heart clench. Maybe that was why he reached out. Why he helped her. He stood there awkwardly, rummaging his pockets for something to give to her. His finger tapped against solidity in a sea of wrappers. He pulled out a lollipop, half melted against the clear wrapper but mostly intact. He knelt down hesitantly and gently nudged the curled-up girl. A pair of brilliant gold eyes, bloodshot and watery, stared up at him. He offered her the candy, pressing it into her hands when she didn't respond, and turned to walk away but felt a weak but desperate tug on his unintentionally ripped breathe leg. He was met the pleading eyes of the young girl. He decided to stay. Their descent to crime wasn't pleasant but inevitable. He wasn't proud of the things they had to do to survive. But there was a tinge of satisfaction every time a lifeless body drops onto the floor, charred to oblivion or completely drained of blood. He and Toga were a team. They found themselves gaining reputation quickly, from street dwellers to makeshift assassins. The League of Villains found them soon after. In the prospect of a permanent home and a somewhat stable life, they agreed immediately. But somewhere deep inside, Dobby just couldn't let go of his old memories, his estranged siblings. His old life. No matter how many times the unwanted feelings burned his skin. Somewhere buried inside, he was still Tuya Todoroki. And he hated it. Dobby looked over at the three children in black and red. At some point, they all gave up on art entirely and went off to do their own thing. The purple-haired one had pulled out a battered blue Game Boy and the original Tetris theme song started to tinkle out as he smashed random buttons. He sat cross-legged on the dumpster bin, whistling off-key to the melody. The other two sat on top of the dumpster bins along the opposite wall. Dual-haired kid, Joan was his name, playing the knife game with the hooded ones, Corey, outstretched hand. Dobby just raised an eyebrow. Where did they even get such a huge knife? Every stab grew in pressure, eventually making dents on the metal surface but never once actually cutting the fingers. Corey just looked bored. The half-black, half-red child was deadly accurate, always landing the blow in the exact spot every time. The speed went up rapidly but the shorter ones still didn't flinch. After about 6 rounds more of the knife game, the taller male finally stopped, tossing the blade at the violet-haired gamer without warning. Mauve eyes didn't leave the screen as he caught the weapon hurtling at his face by the grip and clipped it somewhere inside his boots. The hooded figure pulled back his hood and combed an intact hand through his hair in frustration. His appearance was a shock to say the least. Soft green curls framed a delicate marble face as star-like freckles scatters across his button nose and smooth cheeks. His eyes were the most striking feature, slanted and doll-like. Pure glacial gray pupils frigid like frost and encased by long, dark lashes that swept his cheeks every time he blinked. The boy looked so innocent, and yet, something in those jaded monochrome eyes chilled Dobby to the very core. Somehow he knew, be it pure instinct or otherwise, to not mess with the small green-haired child if he wanted to live another day. Back to reality. Izuku handed over the small pack of compact needles from his thigh pocket to Shudo reluctantly. Shudo had definitely improved with his accuracy, so much so that his knife work could rival Izuku's own. If you had told me you improved so much, I wouldn't have made such a stupid bet. He whined jokingly. But where's the fun in that? Besides, you get off on the unknown Mr. Adrenaline Junkie. His partner smirked and Toshi just nodded his head. Izuku didn't argue. After all, it was the truth. They still had an hour left to spare. The blonde suggested mugging some people with the remainder of the time, so they ambushed 3 teenagers, a businessman and an old lady before the hour was up. $1,000 in total. Patchwork Boy finally strolled over to them, eyes lingering on Izuku for a second longer before talking. Time's up, people. A truly homicidal grin split apart his scarred skin as his turquoise eyes burned with raw, unadulterated hatred. Let's have some fun. Aizawa Shoyuta felt a nauseating sensation in his gut. Anxiety and dulled fear pulled at his internal organs while he sat stone-faced on the bus, watching the scenery blur past him. He didn't like it. Maybe it was the lack of sleep, but that was almost on a daily basis. Why was his heart pulsing so fast? Is he finally having a slide? Probably not. Nothing was going wrong. Not yet. He was still tense, spine stiff as a rod as his students cheered for their first hero training field trip. QZ. Even as they got off the bus, uneasiness still gripped at his heels like lead chains. Aizawa wasn't listening as the space hero, 13, introduced the unforeseen STMLTN joint in all its glory. His eyes scanned every corner of the huge faculty meticulously, looking for a reason to ease his worry. That never came. Instead, an ominous black rip in the air formed right in front of his students. The black rip splayed out tendrils of misty shadows encircling each other until a massive warp gate was formed. A man covered in hands crawled out like the scene from The Ring, a single red eye bleeding with insanity as he stared at his students. He wore a long black shirt and black dress breathes, figure slightly hunched as even more people flooded through the gates. Guns, knives, baseball bats, barbed wire, piercings, mohawks and bloodthirsty grins were the only constant in the imposing assembly. Villains. Aizawa was the first to react, stepping in front of his children and yelling at them to escape. But they were all paralyzed, like a deer in headlights. Terror and fear in their eyes as they trembled under the cruel gazes. Aizawa could only sigh. They were only just children. Might. The hands man started to rip the skin around his neck. Droplets of red drew at the pale and torn skin. If he isn't here, then let's kill a few of his precious little students to pass the time. His voice was nails against concrete. Who knows, maybe he'll appear then. Smoke encircled his students as a man completely consisted of shadows stepped into sight. Burning neon eyes, the only light in the sea of black. After all, he is meant to save the day. His students were gone, along with the mob of criminals. All that was left was the hands man, a grotesque creature with matted muscular flesh and an exposed brain. The battle had started. Nobody noticed the lone, green-haired boy sitting at the highest peak of the faculty, watching the revolution unfold as he jotted down notes in a gray notebook. He observed the young students as they struggled to stay alive. Weaknesses. Flaws. Little did they know. He grinned underneath the mask. The notes he wrote held the key to Yue's ruin. What the actual F-? Bakugo yelled in a fit of rage at the villain in front of him. The BSTRD just continued to ignore him as he fidgeted with a FING Rubrik's cube. Shut up, will you? Be a good doggy and sit down. Who the f do you think Y-? Sit down and shut up. He sat down. What did you F do? But he didn't speak. He couldn't speak. Another hooded BSTRD casually walked up behind him. Hey King, can I borrow your shotgun? Is this another one of you kangas, or are you just too lazy to kill him? Yes. You know what? Never mind. Oh wait, are we actually meant to kill anyone, or do we just stop them? I mean, technically the hands guy didn't give us any specific orders. Ah, true. Wait, where's Kore then? The two stayed in stunned silence for a split second as reality hit them like a tractor. Oh shit. Aizawa had his face smashed against the concrete by the Nomu, or whatever the F that thing was. It wasn't pleasant. At all. His consciousness slipped away, but he fought tooth and nail to hold on. Never fear, for I am here. The booming voice of All Might, followed by Snipe's bullets and a cool montage of the other pro heroes, was an unexpected relief. The blood was seeping his clothes now. Red blossomed as he felt himself drifting away. At least his students were safe. Oh no. You can't die just yet, mister. Past the veil dulled pain, Aizawa met the intense gaze of a bandaged, gray-eyed boy who had suddenly materialized before him. He's so young. Couldn't have been older than a teenager. Hey mister, do you want to know something interesting? You're definitely going to die before they get here, but I can save you. Aizawa didn't respond, so the boy continued. But in return, you're going to have to do me a small favor. Oh CRP. Slipping away already? The boy recovered a small vial of deep red liquid that glowed a strange iridescent in the light. He unscrewed the cap with a pop and poured the contents into Aizawa's parted lips. This might hurt a bit. Understatement of the FING century. The liquid itself burned of burning metal, tearing the skin right off his tongue. As it traveled down his throat, every nerve screamed in hellish torment as the liquid tore up his insides like a wildfire. He couldn't even scream. The poison swallowed his voice. He slipped away from the world of the living. Hitoshi stabbed himself mentally for not keeping an eye on the lil green brat. If he blows the building up, then we're all doomed, Shudo stated the obvious. I can't spend another day in a FNG hospital bed. We are finding him right now. Too many days have been wasted staring into the sterilized distance of the doctor's office because of Izuku's sheet. He and Shudo dodged piles upon literal piles of unconscious thugs as they tried to find their murderous, possibly insane partner. What they didn't expect was the small male to be sitting cross-legged next to a spasming body of a tired man, writing in a notepad and clearly ignoring the what seemed to be a FING epic and dramatic boss fight between Japan's top hero and a horrifying chicken with arms in the distance. Actually, scratch that. They expected it. Kore, my comrade, my best friend. Hitoshi deadpanned. The greenette just sighed and looked up with a "what did I do wrong this time" expression written on his face. Shinso took a deep breath before continuing. Why must you be like this? In my defense, I don't actually plan on blowing this building up. Yeah, okay, but how in the living hell do you explain that? Hitoshi jabbed his finger at the convulsing mess of a human being next to Izuku. Oh yeah. Well, I was watching him fight and thought he was too interesting to die. Shudo kneeled down, studying the man for a moment before face-palming. You gave him your blood, didn't you? Wait, seriously? Hitoshi's eyes widened in an oddly comedic fashion. You know that blood burns up people's insides, right? It can't be that bad though, see? He's already getting better. The man chose this moment to cough up black bile all over himself. Are you sure you gave him the right dosage? Probably. The core villain retreated after the American hero yeeted evil chicken with arms to the moon or somewhere between the ozone layers. They left behind the lackeys, which somehow included Izuku, Shuto, and Hitoshi. Actually, nobody really bothered them or tried to pick a fight apart from the explosive blonde brat. They sat around ranting about their mission's quality while waiting for the homeless hero to either die or wake up. You know, lately we have been given the shittiest jobs, don't you think? I actually have to agree, there really isn't anything interesting anymore. The three sighed unanimously. Should we escape from here or just get caught? I'm too lazy to move. Besides, literally nothing gives me more satisfaction than being a pain in the butt to the higher-ups. They stole your food one time, Shudo. Nobody messes with my effing Oreos. But no one. The three kept on chatting away even as the battle came to a close and the police started to handcuff the passed out and injured villains left behind. Do you think that they'll be mad? Izuku deadpanned, looking around the insides of a police van. Shudo just rolled his mismatched eyes. Since when did you care? It took the police exactly 7 minutes and 43.7 seconds to find and arrest the trio after the villains had retreated. The entire vicinity had been charred and damaged beyond repair. Somehow, the body count didn't go above 0, but that was probably because of the lack of planning in their attacks. Dabi and Togo were forced to drop out last minute because of another appointment which resulted in 4 bar stools reduced to ashes, a lot of broken glass and around 100 traumatized witnesses. They ended up having all their gear confiscated and were taken to separate holding cells. The cell was completely bare, without any jagged edges to conveniently end it all, but that didn't stop Izuku. He pulled at the bandage around his wrist, the fine threads ripping apart easily to reveal a plastic bag with a single crimson tablet inside. Downing the pill without hesitation, his vision slanted and blurred out like a static channel. This will give him 5 hours tops. The familiar fading of sceneries gave Izuku a comforting sensation of nostalgia as he felt the gentle breeze of his dreamscape. He didn't open his eyes, just taking in the calming distillations of his surroundings. Back so soon? The same, chiming voice put his mind at ease as he let his eyes open to gaze at the ethereal woman he met that fateful day. Still the same gray eyes as the ones he sees in every reflection stared back at him, those appealing crystal gray pupils softening with affection and unspoken amusement for the young boy. He couldn't help but grin stupidly. "I'm home." His adoptive mother grinned back. "Welcome home." Aizawa Shoyuda woke up the next day alive. Uninjured. Somehow. All he remembered from the USG attack was getting his face shoved into concrete by a monster and a green-haired boy feeding him some liquid before the sensation of literally having his heart ripped out blacked out his vision and his consciousness. He insisted on interrogating the captured villains. He needed to find the boy again. So he forced his way out of the hospital bed, past all the protesting nurses as he called his close associate to pick him up and bring him along to the interrogations. After around 3.5 hours of dull speeches on the problems with society from social rejects, Aizawa had begun to lose hope of finding his mysterious savior in this mountain of paperwork. Until the police brought in 3 handcuffed teenagers with absolutely uninterested looks in their eyes. They couldn't have been any older than his own students. The boy sitting in the far right was by far the most peculiar. Half a blazing red and half pitch black hair with the black side being pinned back with white clips and the right side covering a little bit of a burn scar that took up a majority of his right side. Angled heterochromatic eyes a dulled gray and burning turquoise sat, unfazed by the fact that he just got arrested. The most shocking thing was his tattoo, a collage of outlined and expertly shaded roses etched into his burnt red scar on his right cheek. The thorns stretched down to his jawline as the petals itself rested against his cheek. The one on the left side almost looked bored. His violet hair wavy and tied back into a loose low bun with odd strands framing his pale face. His hooded eyes were a shade of glazed lavender entrapped in circles as dark as Aizawa's as he put up a lazy smirk and tapped his cuffed hands against the table. Wearing the standard white shirt, they exposed the wreath of outlined flowers, hydrangeas. Much like the first boy encircling all the way around his neck like a choker. The last one was the freckled boy that he saw at curly loose ringlets of forest green hair that reached half was down his neck. His gray eyes surprisingly bright and optimistic compared to the other two. Nobody questioned the blood-stained bandages that covered his limbs, torso and most of his neck, deciding that it wasn't a threat. The boy was less built up than the other two, slimmer and feminine by any account. Detective Tsukachi begun the interrogation calmly as Aizawa watched from the other side of the glass with re-sparked interest. "Why were you working with the League of Villains?" The violet-haired one spoke up, purposely crossing his legs and resting face of his arms on the desk, an absolutely deadpan expression in his face. "Because it's our job, sir." "Well, that was unexpected." "Their job? Who do you work for exactly?" "That's private information, sir." The violet-haired one had an unnervingly calming voice. almost the same quality as waves crashing against the sand. Well, what are your names then? The dual-haired one spoke up in a blank tone. Joan. Greenette smiled a little before replying as well. For it. Finally, the violet-eyed boy gave his own name. King. Tsukachi gave a small nod. Despite the sheer absurdity of the names, they were speaking the truth. They had their names legally changed to their code names as soon as the training PRD of 1 year had ended and they officially joined the company. However, their past names were used as an ironic reminder of the past that they had left behind and why they left it to burn in flames. But they didn't tell that to the plain-faced detective. The interrogation went OM and the answers became even more cryptic. The boys even rattling in solid English for more than half an hour despite being told that if they don't respond in full comprehensive sentences, their punishment would be harsher for their refusal of cooperation. They were having fun messing with the detective. In the end, the three only revealed that they were a part of a hitman organization, Location International. The police tried to pull up their identities from the database, but nobody with their appearance or names existed within Japan. Or they were completely wiped out. They were international, but they all spoke Japanese to an almost native level, Kore being the most fluent in speech while the others weren't too far behind. They were at a dead end. They can't arrest them as minors and can't sentence them to any form of punishment because they technically didn't exist anywhere in Japan. That's when the phone call came. A shrill and annoying ringtone that Aizawa had never bothered to change came from his pocket. He picked up. Yes. Hello there, sir. I assume that you have taken custody of my boys? The voice was nonchalant. Aizawa put the phone in loudspeaker, catching the attention of everyone else in the room. The search began to find the cell reception, but it was impossible. The ping came from multiple towers all over Japan, some even from the police building itself. And who are you? Oh, I am their legal guardian and manager. You may call me Viper. What do you want? Well, I would normally ask you to return my kids in exchange for your country's safety, but seeing as this is the third time that they purposely got caught, you can keep them for now. Teach them a lesson about being heroes or something. I don't really care. Train them if you can. The last phrase was a blatant challenge. The tone and the words. Call me when you figure out what you're doing with the lil brats. With that, Viper hung up. Aizawa was way too tired for this. He pulled up his contacts and decided to call in the big guns. His boss. Hitoshi looked up at the ceiling for a split second. I have a bad feeling about this. The other two stopped taunting the silent detective almost immediately. Is this another foreshadowing moment? A bear/rodent wearing a suit and tie decided to burst through the door at this moment. Now would be a great time to explain specifically Izuku's quirk power without this story getting confusing as F, so strap in and get prepared for this poor Lil Green Bean's past. The current world population stands as 80%, the majority, holding some form of an anomaly or quirk, as we call it now. However, these statistics are complete and utter bullshit. As we have failed to record supernatural beings whom has stayed somewhat hidden for many centuries before quirks existed. After the discovery of quirks, half-men and blood diners has seamlessly blended into this new society, passing off their species traits as a strange quirk. But this isn't the point. The current survey results had also failed to account for this universe's real OPs, the mythological omnipotent figures. The game creators. The gods. Thing is, all gods of all religions and cultural traditions has somehow learnt to coexist peacefully over the really, really long millennia. This makes heaven, Olympus, Nirvana, depends on what you want to call it, look like an out-of-control Halloween party all year round. So when quirks subtly started to affect humanity like a FING epidemic, everybody just kinda assumed that somebody effed up and granted unimaginable power to the puny mortals. However, in the midst of this chaotic PRD of time, the gods and goddesses of Olympus developed a new hobby, taking advantage of this widespread panic and the turn of a new era. Dealing with bullshit forever really gets deadly boring after the first 500 years. The basic synopsis: share a body with a human being and observe / live in the era of overwhelming power and unique lifestyle in the new world. Rules to the game. exempting the big three: Lord Zeus, god of thunder and king of Olympus, Lord Poseidon, god of the sea, and Lord Hades, king of the dead and god of the underworld. All residents of Olympus are allowed to participate in this game. The vessel the participant decides upon must be quirkless, / without an anomaly to prevent further implications that may damage the body and the participant alike. The vessel must be willing to coexist / give consent to sharing a body with the participant to prevent psychological harm on the vessel's soul. Waging full-scale wars / disputes between countries / manipulate any major economic changes based on a biased situation is strictly forbidden. Let the games begin. Persephone, goddess of spring, loving wife of Hades and the queen of the underworld. The new trend circulating amongst Olympus fascinated her. Persephone decided to temporarily stay with a gentle old lady whom owns a quiet and peaceful little cafe / flower shop in the city area of Mizudafu, Japan. But no reason apart from the fact that she enjoyed interacting with other people in their little corner of the world. Every morning, she would wake up to a perfectly serene and content mind, surrounded by fluffy hand-stitched blankets and delicate embroidery. Persephone would feel her lips quirk up as they stare out at the sunrise, no matter how bright or cloudy it may be, with a cup of milk tea, no sugar. The old lady has good taste, and enjoy the fresh scent of aromatic flowers as they set up shop, preparing little pastries and sweets for the steady flow of customers in the afternoon. Life passed by in the form of light-hearted conversation, gentle laughs, and compliments on the appealing bouquets on display that they had personally arranged, perched on every windowsill and surface in their cute little shop. Every afternoon, a cute little greenette with wide emerald eyes, star-dusted freckles, and an infectious smile would bound in at 4 p.m. without fail, purchasing a small bundle of camellias by the door for his mother with never quite enough coins, but she ignored it. When she asks him why those specific flowers every day, he just laughs without a care in the world and replies, "Because they are pretty." This little boy never failed to make her smile. He was noble, sweet, innocent, kind, hopelessly stubborn, and just a real light, brightening up her already wonderful days. He reminded Persephone a lot of her husband when they first met, honestly. But as the years flew by, the little boy grew up. His smile faded along with the hopeful shine in this wide emerald eyes. But every single day he would trail in without fail to purchase those camellias by the door. After the first day of middle school, he limped in with rips in his sleeves and a swelling eye. The next day, he had his head down, dripping wet with murky liquid staining his forest green hair. The day after that, the next week, every time she saw him, his injuries progressively got worse until one day, the little greenette came in with his shoulder popping out of place and mottled in burnt tissue and blood. She would fix him up the best she can, sewing his uniform up until there was no more damage and treating his wounds. Sometimes calling the help of one her customers, a retired doctor whom sighs every time she sees the damage. Persephone respected Izuku's wishes and never told his mother. He didn't want to worry her, didn't want to expose his mother to the hatred and scrutiny that he lives under. Yesterday, he came in through the door, no discernible injuries, making Persephone exhale in relief. Until she saw his eyes. Completely devoid of light, barely reminiscent of those appealing gems oh so long ago. They sat in silence, drinking a sickeningly sweet tea that made her own stomach turn and watching the boy leave with those slightly wilting pink camellias in his arms. The next day, the boy didn't walk in. 4:05 p.m., her breathing hitched as she desperately tried to calm down, pouring a new brew of herbal tea to soothe her nerves. 4:10 p.m., maybe he got caught up in school. Maybe he's sick and resting at home. There really is no reason to be panicking. He's all right. He has to be, right? 4:15 p.m. Dearie, why don't you just go and check up on him? Persephone could hear the old lady in her thoughts. But what if she manipulates his future by accident? You're just checking to see if he's all right is all. It'll put your mind at ease. She silently thanked the old lady as they separated. It was quick and satisfying, kind of like tearing Velcro apart. The old lady resumed her activity, drinking the freshly brewed tea as Persephone reveled in the freedom of her spirit form. Now, where could the boy possibly be? It was the closest place to her current location. Down the street, whisking past and fluffing the napping cat's fur like a light breeze, sharp left and under the little brick bridge before floating through civilians in business suits on the main road, sending shivers down the clairvoyant one's spines. Finally, the main gates of Aldra Junior High. She passed the closed-off gates easily before softly landing in a bare concrete courtyard with nothing but a koi pond occupying the massive space. There was a single notebook page fluttering, dancing playfully in the wind. She caught the crumpled and ripped page. Just take a swan dive off the roof and wish for a quirk in your next life. Scrawled the page in crimson marker. Persephone looked up just in time to see a little green-haired boy jump off the 7-story building above her. Time seemed to slow as the light grazed his marble featured in his decent, the golden afternoon glow adorning his wide, jaded emerald eyes and the gentle breeze softly caressing his curly wild hair, drawing more attention to his lovely freckles. His lips twisted into a contempt smile as he closed his eyes. No 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 no. Persephone panicked, desperately trying to think of a way to save the little boy. He doesn't deserve to die so soon. He still has a future to live for. This can't be the end of his story. Curses. Wait. Curses? A sickening crack echoed through the silent courtyard. His gakurin steadily started to soak in a deep red as his slender limbs twisted in unnatural positions like a broken doll. The blood started to spread further out, seeping into the concrete pavement like a pair of bloody wings. His sculpted face gently and relaxed like a fallen angel. She didn't have time to hesitate. Stepping into the blood and yet, leaving no footprints as she reached into his chest, past his punctured lungs and into his still heart. Finally, she pulled out a cracked and dulled but green fragile marble. His soul. Persephone clutched the little thing close to her chest as she dipped her free index finger in the ever-flowing river of red and drew a mark. A shaky 7-like symbol with 2 short and abrupt lines next to the symbol along Izuku's cold collarbone. The mark glowed for a brief moment before disappearing into his skin. Only one thing left to do now. She was barely aware of the nearing footsteps from the font gates as she produced a single pomegranate seed, a bloody glass-like shade in the light. She downed it like a pill. The ground fissioned below her as the sudden absence of a ground left her tumbling into the underworld. The little green marble safely tucked away in her white gown. Persephone never really understood why people feared crossing the river Styx so much. But then again, having all that your worldly possessions and memories over the course of a lifetime ripped away, leaving you as nothing but a blank canvas in an art museum really doesn't seem appealing to many. She never liked taking the ferry over the river as she gets severely boatsick, but just for today, she'll have to put up with it. Approaching the riverbank from the only alive patch of grass where she had landed from an ungodly height, she settled in the line behind an utterly mortified man. I can't die yet. I still have my children to take care of. Please don't do this. He pleaded on his knees, only to hear the ferryman scoff underneath his ripped-up hood. I really don't offend you care. A gravelly voice deadpanned, obviously sick of this sheet. A solid arm emerged from the folds of cloth and yanked the man up by the collar, flinging him into the murky realms of Styx. She stepped up, catching the old man's attention. His thin and cracking lips twisted into an attempted smile. Sharon has always had a soft spot for the queen. Maybe it's because she's the only immortal that ever uses the ferry route as opposed to shadow walking. For it, how are you, my dear? Persephone grinned a little at the old nickname. She pulled the old man's large frame in for an affectionate hug. Sharon had always thought of Persephone as a daughter, kind and innocent. The mere fact that she visits him every now and again may be the only thing keeping him sane over a millennia of dealing with hysterical dead people. She boarded the ferry alone, Sharon opting to kick out any pre-existing ghosts into the abyss to make room for the queen. Their conversations fell into a comfortable lull, Persephone recounting her peaceful days and Sharon complaining about someone who had thrown up black bile on his clothes after he had been fished out of the black liquid. They laughed and joked, Persephone momentarily forgetting her boat sickness save for the rising bile and the twisting in her stomachy. Now, normally she wouldn't be affected by these sorts of weaknesses, but apparently, When you're on a bridge between life and death, that sheet can be pretty common, even for immortals. She felt sympathy for the ferryman, wondering how he could work under these conditions. They finally reached the other side, and as Persephone stepped off the raft and onto land, she turned around to face Sharon with a huge woven gift basket out of literal thin air. A pastel bouquet of preserved yellow roses, little baked blueberry muffins, chocolate-coated strawberries, and a little teddy bear wearing a miniature copy of Karen's hood. The old man teared up a little bit, which he desperately tried to hide behind his steely persona. He accepted the adorable gift basket, placing it carefully on the safest part of the raft before bidding her goodbye. Persephone made her way up the cobbled concrete pavement, past the lines of restless and uncomfortable spirits, saying a quick greeting to the part-time security guard who let her through without much trouble. Thing is, the road to the afterlife is a lot like traveling to a different country. Many standards are needed to be upheld to allow the system to function without anyone accidentally wandering into the fiery pits of damnation on accident. But when your husband is literally the king of the underworld, some privileges are bound to be tied up with this arrangement. Eventually, she chose to slip into the shadows, willing herself to melt and become one with the abyss, envisioning the ominous yet familiar arch of her husband's personal estate. Persephone materialized into reality mere seconds after, eyes fluttering open to a huge, snarling beast so close to her face she could smell the burnt flesh and age-old blood on the thing's lips. Her face lit up in pure joy. Cerberus! The three-headed, giant mountain of a puppy howled in equal enthusiasm as she stepped closer, bare feet gliding along the cold, concrete pavement drenched in a variety of speckled blood. The decor's pretty off-trend, but I'm too lazy to fix it at this point. Hades had explained the first time she stepped into his domain. Her lips quirked fondly at the memory. The puppy trained 3 pairs of neon eyes at her expectantly. "Hey boy, sorry but I don't have time to play with you today." The alpha of the 3, Maxie, whimpered slightly. Persephone felt like a horrible person, but instead of complying, she beckoned the doggo to lean down before pecking their foreheads like children. "I'll see you soon, all right?" The dark puppy growled, but with no malice in his tone. They nudged her, almost shooing her away. Persephone just chuckled as she made her way past the gargoyle statues standing guard with bloody lifelike eyes, navigating the endless corridors before finally reaching Hades' office. She wandered into the vintage, Victorian-styled office with midnight blue drapes and worn-out oakwood floors. The shelving taking up a whole wall in an impeccable state, crammed to its maximum capacity with all her husband's favorite books. She even spotted a new one in his collection that caught her eye as she walked past: Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief. She'll have to make sure to borrow that one in the future. Her husband never sat in the throne, apparently because it was uncomfortable, but she has always had a nagging suspicion that it was out of spite, as that was the first and only gift that he has ever received from his brothers. A mocking joke. Instead, her eyes found her appealing man in round-rimmed glasses, drawing attention to his long silver lashes, sprawled on his back over a shockingly pink beanbag in the corner of the room, surrounded by stacks of paperwork and ink splatters. He was asleep. How cute. She knelt down in front of his sleeping stature, gently flicked him on the forehead, and those gorgeous lashes flew open, revealing timeless silver pupils dipped in dull annoyance, long silvery blonde hair covering his eyes haphazardly. "Sweetie, what the F dash dot?" She couldn't help but snort a little at his bluntness. She knew he wasn't mad. Slightly agitated definitely, a little tired maybe, but not mad. "Hey love, I may have cursed a child with the mark of Cain." He sighed and closed his eyes. "You're awfully calm about this." She tilted her head at Hades' remark. "I'm not panicking, I did it on purpose." "Oh." Seeing his silence as an invite for his willingness to listen to her reasons, Persephone began to spin the story of the boy named Midoriya Izuku. The room around them dropped in temperature, signaling Hades' disgust at the horrific pain this boy had to endure, but his cool features remained a careful blank. Honestly, she didn't blame him for his facade of disinterest. Her husband had long grown apathetic to the fate's cruel attacks towards his morality in the form of the dead stories. Other Olympians would look at her strange and whisper behind her back, spreading rumors about her husband's cruel, and evil acts toward her without any evidence. It broke her heart a little to think that such a wonderful man could be so misunderstood just because of his occupation. Maybe that is why she had grown so attached to the little greenette, because the way reality broke him seemed so uncanny to her own lover's inner turmoil. He sighed, pinching the bridge of his sculpted nose when she finished. "I'll call Zeus and give him the update later." His tone was bitter as he spoke of his brother, eyes flashing in an incomprehensible hatred before the malice dissipated as he reached out his cool hand and gently drew her in for a kiss. His marble-cool lips sending shivers down her spine. She blushed like mad even though they had been married for many years. "Just let me take a quick dash," and he was out like a light bulb. She admired his resting face, all the stress and worry seeping out of his features, rendering her fearsome king of the dead into a resting angel. She gently tiptoed her way out of the room before making her way down the maze of catacombs lit up by lazy blue flames. Her room closely resembled her mother's domain. Nothing but an endless field of lovely daisies as far as the eye and an inverted inky sky stretching to unknown bounds. She gently released the green little marble from the palm of her hands, allowing it to roll into the flower beds, from in which a metallic shine bounced off the reflective dewdrops of black on the petals as the marble grew into a cute but bruised little boy. Was it even possible for a goddess to adopt a human child? Well, there were no rules banning it specifically, so it must be legal. Besides, no one has kicked down the gates of hell demanding for this to stop, so they must be cool with it. The boy's eyes were still closed, breathing peacefully, putting her own heart at ease. Persephone gently eased the boy's head against her lap like her mother would do for her as a young girl and started to sing. Clear, wordless, fragile melodies resonated with the gentle plants as the wind hummed back in the form of gentle warm ruffles against her skin. Time runs differently in the underworld. Years seem like minutes and decades seems like a second. Sometimes time stops altogether. There really isn't a way to tell. The dead doesn't abide by the rules of the cruel clock, as their internal countdown had already ended. In any normal case, a human being is equipped with an internal clock from Biartich, wounding up the red string of fate buried deep within their souls, little marble-like objects the shade of their personality. The red string eventually fades into black over the years they spend alive. As soon as the string runs out, the Reaper would come for their soul. However, gods of any and all religions, due to the multicultural melting pot that has grown in size over many years, can use a wide collective of curses, blessings, and even charms to alter a human's lifeline. However, a god, no matter what status, is only allowed to use the really powerful curses only once every 200 years to prevent an uprising in said immortal human beings. In Persephone's case, she had used the Mark of Cain to preserve Midoriya's body. The first and only case of the Mark of Cain being used is where the story had originated from. She had even met the boy who murdered his own brother, cursed to forever walk on the wretched earth in his halted state while he watches the rest of the world move on around him. Never able to grow attached. Never able to grow old. Never able to die. Such a lonely life it is. But she didn't want Izuku to be lonely. She wanted him to have the freedom to do anything he wants. The boy was far too precious and deserved way more than what this shitty reality gave him. Speaking of the devil, the boy's glittering emerald eyes opened and stared right into her own. No panic, no worry. He gazed up in the quiet curiosity that he would always display when he was watching hero fights on his phone, muttering to himself. She smiled down gently as she made her choice. She leaned down and brushed her lips against his fluttering eyelids, transferring the pure energy coursing within herself to his eyes. A gift, to my dear Kore. By giving him her own name, she was unofficially adopting him. Izuku Kore Midoriya, unofficial for now, son of the queen and king of the underworld. Over time, he sat up silently, keeping a little distance but still within arm's reach, pulling his legs closer and curling up into a little ball, new gray eyes the shade somewhere between her husband's and her own. A trait unique to the underworld, staring up at the sky in wonder. No words were spoken. Just a sort of mutual understanding. Even as he started to fade away from the land of the dead, an obvious sign that his physical body had healed enough for his should to return, She could see the newly kindled determination mingled in with slight panic in his clear eyes. Persephone knew her new son would take the wood by storm. Hades stood by the door, leaning against the doorframe and watching the whole ordeal, feeling one hell of a headache coming on. Her muttered mostly to himself. Great. We have a child now. How the F am I going to explain this to Zeus? Nizu was having a perfectly peachy day. The sun was shining on his cool fur as he stared out the window of his own office. In his paw the best cup of tea he's ever made in all his years. Everything was going great. Nothing could possibly go wrong. Then the underground hero, Eraser, had called. At some point in this timeline, Nizu had long figured out that whenever Aizawa calls, it means something bad is going down. The man hates using his phone more than anything on the planet, only to be topped by communicating with people. A combination of both made the dead inside hero avoid calling people like the plague. He listened patiently to the drawling tone over the speakers and contemplated his colleague's situation. On one hand, have 3 professional teenage hitmen in a school training for future heroes seem a little bit contradictory to say the least, but since they were minors and hold international passports, they technically cannot be trialed or detained with physical evidence. Which there was none. From Aizawa's description, Nizu could decipher that the 3 mysterious boys had a lot of experience in cryptic answers. In speaking half-truths and revealing nothing. Maybe the new hero class can learn a thing or two from the trio. It would help them immeasurably in the future picking up fighting dirty and manipulation. This may not be right for a hero to learn, but naivety and blunt force without planning is what causes the most casualties. It was all for the good of his students. Aizawa-san, I will be there shortly. You're going to have some new students. Wait, what the foo? Nizu hung up before Aizawa could finish his sentence. Congratulations kids, you're going to UA. A bear wearing a FING suit of all things bursts through the door as soon as Hitoshi finishes his sentence. Hitoshi groaned, staring up at the fluorescent lighting, hoping that it would somehow burn his eyes out or it cause temporary blindness so he would at least have a distraction from the far too fed-up situation for this time in the morning without a double shot of coffee and maybe, definitely, vodka. Me. The thing actually talks. Korei's eyebrows quirked in a passive curiosity as he tilted his head at the strange creature. What the F is UA? Shudo seemed semi-focused on the opening sentence and asked out of genuine confusion. Even if it was blunt. Language. Tsukachi felt a rising tide of annoyance all bottled up inside of him from the past, aggravating hour. He pressed the bridge of his nose, hoping to relieve the headache that was definitely going to happen. Sorry, whom the F is you? Not better, but kudos for trying, I guess. Heroes? Is nobody going to question the fact that we're looking at a modern-day miracle wearing a suit? The green one's eyes were on him and seemed a little too diluted to be normal. Something to do with his quirk, perhaps? Nobody cares, Korei. Shudo waved dismissively and Izuku pouted, allowing his slim body to plop onto Shudo's warm shoulder. The dual-haired one only growled in annoyance but didn't pull away. Izuku took this as a yes and purred, nuzzling into his collarbone like a cat. Hitoshi was still having an existential crisis but acknowledged the PDA before proceeding to scream internally at his prophecies. Wait, you boys don't know what UA is? Nizu was honestly surprised, considering they were with the League of Villains. You know, ones who attacked the hero class in a fully planned-out ambush. Should we? Oh wait, isn't that the group of kids we attacked? The dual-haired one seemed to snap out of running his fingers through the green one's soft curls, somehow managing the feat in HNDSFFS no less. To hell if I know, man, I never actually read the files they send, the purple one shot back in wary annoyance. Does anybody though? No. A muffled murmur came from the green one, still buried in the taller boy's shoulder. Nizu was honestly starting to regret his choices, but it was far too late to back down now. He made his coffin and these boys were going to take immense joy in nailing it. He could tell. He cleared his throat before continuing. Well anyway, UA is the biggest and most prestigious hero academy in all of Japan, and all the students enrolled in our heroics program is guaranteed a spot in saving civilians as their future career. All 3 of the boys stiffened at the word hero. And what if we refuse? You really don't have a say in this. Your guardian had already given us full custody of you for the being. Aizawa walked into the room, slapping down all the printed files on the desk. The green-haired boy pulled away from the comfort of darkness and picked out the first page gingerly, scanning the contents. Mr. Hisashi's print-like signature at the bottom left corner. Directly below the agreement of signing the three of them away to the legal custody of U.A Academy. DMN. They're telling the truth. My intuition. The dual-haired child took this opportunity to smack the back of the purple kid's head from across the table. Aizawa stole glances at the boys as they drove to the main campus the next day. Apart from their peculiar augmentations in appearances, they seemed like normal, average teenagers. The three prepared themselves for a makeshift entrance exam a lot more personal than the ones held at the beginning of the year. Since they didn't actually attack anyone and there were no previous records to go off on, the impromptu exam served as a way to figure out what their quirks were. Whether or not they were a threat. The children actually obliged without much of a fuss. Afanji blessing honestly. They stood their ground. Their jumpers and gear had been returned to them. With their hoodies discarded, they all bore skin-tight black singlets and cargo dark breeds along with far too many weapons to count. They didn't wear their original masks either, as there really was no point. You are going to be fighting me individually with your quirks. We can then decipher whether you have enough potential to be transferred into 1A considering your age. Aizawa explained with a dead tone. It was still surreal to believe that kids so young and naive can beat him in close combat, but something about their predatory gazes told him to keep his guard up. First up was King. His posture relaxed as he plugged in earbuds and chose a song off of his returned iPod. He cracked his neck and fingers, relishing in the release that they brought to his stiffened body before looking Aizawa dead in the eyes and grinning wide than a Cheshire cat. Izuku and Shudo stood against the wall, calling their bets. Spoiler, they both voted for Hitoshi. The staff currently on campus stood by to observe. Present Mike, Midnight, Nizu, Recovery Girl as well as the shrunken version of All Might eyed the boys with a wary curiosity and pity for the children who had to go against a pro hero. Start. The voice signaled the start, but King didn't move. He stayed the same, relaxed and casual whilst Aizawa stiffened in his fighting position, Quirk ready to go. Something dropped. A single breath out of time. A falling chess piece cracking audibly under the pressure. A joker revealing itself as the king. But something in the tense atmosphere broke in too. 1 second, the violet-haired boy was cheerful, almost weirdly jolly, and the next, he was mere inches away from Aizawa's face with a FING nightmare-fueled grin slashed across his face. He glitched out of view like a horror movie. Aizawa immediately activated his quirk, but the boy didn't reappear. Confusion riddled his brain. What was his quirk? Invisibility, perhaps? Teleportation, maybe? Why isn't he reappearing? Instead, he felt cold metal pressed against his jugular and a bone-chilling sound behind him. Good game. The tides in the boy's voice was terrifyingly calm. Yagi Tashinori's just stared with his jaw hitting the floor and wheezing up a bit of blood from sheer shock. A teenage boy had actually bested Aizawa in a match. He took a sneak glance at the others around his only to find similar reactions. Holy sure dash. But there was no time for Midnight to finish his sentence. The next examinee was up. Shudo stepped into the arena as Hitoshi stepped out. He held out his hand and his partner clasped it, the echoes resonating within the huge space, and they grinned like a pair of maniacs. Izuku just huffed jokingly in the corner. He stood in front of the dead-inside hero. His quirk erases quirks, so you're better off with solid weaponry, Izuku had whispered into his ear as they watched Hitoshi's stealth and speed at work. The man seemed surprised that Hitoshi ended in so fast. But years of hellish training under the infamous and surviving ridiculously outnumbered odds would do that to you. Looking at himself now, Shudo wondered where he'd be without Izuku's advice. Probably rotting underwater in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Which is oddly specific, but that's another can of worms for another time. Solid weapons, huh? Start. Hunting knives. He decided. Hunting knives should fit this scenario perfectly. This boy was different. Completely different. Cold and closed off like an icy barricade. He unsheathed 2 curved hunting blades from his belt and raised them slowly into a ready position. He was waiting for Aizawa to attack first. Aizawa readied himself and rushed towards the boy. Joan had no pattern. Just an irregular sequence of crazed but calculative and scary accurate slashes. Aizawa struggling to keep up, barely dodging the second blow every time. He aimed for the boy's legs to sweep him of balance, but the kid was impossibly light on his feet. Barely skimming the floor, Jones spun and landed a heavy Brazilian kick on his unguarded shoulder, which wouldn't normally bring him down, but it seemed that he struck a pressure point. Aizawa grimaced as he toppled like Jenga, landing on his knees as Shudo smirked a tiny bit and brought himself down to the hero's eye level. Tilting his head, he gave the same of not even more terrifying grin that King held. Didn't think you'd last this long, sir. Maybe Kore was right about you after all. Who in the living hell are these children? Midnight gaped, pressing her face against the window while Present Mike just pinched himself to see whether or not he was dreaming. Yagi, Tashinori's and Nizu stayed silent, their eyes on the last boy. Shudo stepped of the arena, sliding back the hunting knives and gave Izuku the green light. The doll-like Greenette pushed himself off the wall and eyed the dual-haired teen expectantly. He's okay. Izuku grinned. His analysis wasn't wrong at all. He strides into the arena. You look tired, sir. Why don't you take a break? He teased gently, pushing the teacher's buttons on purpose. Aizawa struggled into his feet, stumbling slightly. Shudo was starting to get good at aiming for pressure points. Shut up, you little brat. Izuku just grinned. Whatever you say, Mr. Eraserhead. Start. Again, this one's fighting style was completely different from the others. He was merciless, but there was no sign of malicious intent in his strikes. No intent to kill lingered in his gray eyes. More like a child playing with a new toy. His combat itinerary was a reconnaissance of every type of martial arts combined to suit every possible situation and outcome. It was like fighting FNG computer. It was like the kid could read his movements like a book. The kid matched Aizawa par on par, but the tired man never even so much as scratched the boy. His bleary eyes couldn't train in on the harsh and brutal blows as they stuck his ribcage like a bus. Aizawa lasted 5 minutes against this one. But he knew that if the boy was serious, he wouldn't last a second. Japanese heroes really are a different breed, huh? Izuku's dolly gray eyes sparkled with a strangely unnatural, innocent delight as he sat on the comfy couch to what was apparently the principal's office. No kidding, never thought they were so tough. Shudo played with a streak of his glossy black hair with an added hint of bitterness in his tone, but his posture was relaxed and casual as can be, slouching slightly into Izuku's slender frame. Honestly, the dead-looking man did half okay. He survived after drinking Kore's blood and fighting against all 3 of us. Hitoshi spoke in a reflective tone, focusing more on the mini Tamagotchi in his slender fingers rather than the actual conversation. Told ya he's something else. Izuku's eyes shone even brighter at the reluctant praise coming from his partner's mouth. Nizu cleared his throat and the 3 turned their attention to the mouse thing, still in shock about the suit by the way. I apologize for interrupting your conversation, but what did you mean when you said that Aiza's Eraserhead that drank your blood? Well, he was in really bad shape after getting his face pummeled in and his arms semi-disintegrated, so I saved him. My blood has healing properties, or so I'm told. And it stings like an absolute beach. Joan pointed out with startling bluntness and truth in his tone. It's basically like chugging down gasoline and then deep-throating lit-up dynamite. King explained with a complete straight face. I'm not hurt. The other 2 teens on the couch just shrugged. Oh. The symbol of peace was standing by the door looking awkward and grossed out. The number 1 pro hero seemed surprisingly timid for someone of his size. Anyway, you have all passed the mock entrance exams with flying colors. Congratulations. You will be transferred into Class 1A, the first-year heroics course on a scholarship, and all accommodations will be provided in the newly built Hero Alliance dorms on campus. However, since you were arrested on accounts of being involved in villainy, you will not be allowed off campus without an adult or a hero class student with you. You are required to wear Quirk suppressant cuffs disguised as bracelets, as we do not know the extent of your powers and however unstable they might be. They are only to be taken off during hero training. I have already contacted your manager, Viper, and he has agreed to the following terms. You are strictly prohibited from contacting any villains involved in the attack or leak any of the UA students' personal information. Understood? The boys nodded like being accepted into the most prestigious hero academy directly after getting arrested for villainy was just a regular Tuesday. Crystal. Aizawa groaned as his eyesight came back to him while he held an ice pack to his forehead, attempting to quell an inevitable migraine. He was in Recovery Girl's office, staring off at nothing in particular. Those kids. Aizawa raised an eyebrow. They're dangerous. Not just their skills. Their eyes are horrifying. Her voice was shaky, but Recovery Girl was right. Their eyes didn't belong to children so young. They burnt neon with bloodlust. Aizawa sighed. They were going to be his students as of today. What a headache. All Might was nervous. Somehow, he couldn't stop his fingers from trembling even in his hero form. Somebody please save me. He wasn't even great at dealing with his own students, let alone teenage contract killers. The green-haired boy the most. Aizawa dragged himself out of Recovery Girl's office just to run into All Might and the three brats. I just can't catch a break. Seeing the pleading look on All Might's face made it even worse. I'll take over showing them to the dorms. My students are arriving shortly anyway. Relief flooded over his face as he waved Aizawa an overly enthusiastic goodbye, disappearing around the corridor. Aizawa could only sigh as he leads the little party to their new dorms. So why were you with the League of Villains anyway? Aizawa subtly attempted to get more information out of the kids. Because it's our job, King gave the same answer. Cut the bullshit, why would you choose to side with the villains? Whoever has a deeper pocket is always the side we pick. Jones stated bluntly. Doesn't their morales disturb you? Not really, we've seen worse. The green one replied nonchalantly. In this world, you really can't rely on morales to keep you alive. The purple one's eyes darkened as his tone dipped in ice. We do what we do to survive. Nothing more, nothing less. The three nodded in sync, freaking the living F out of Aizawa, but he didn't let it show. Uraraka Ochako was stoked. Bouncing up and down, floating everything within a 10-meter radius, kind of excited. She stood in front of the mansion-like Hero Alliance dorms and couldn't stop herself from squealing in delight. Everyone else started to gather with their few suitcases. This is it. Nobody talked about the villain attack at USG, but it was still itching in the back of their minds. They had fought tooth and nail to survive. Which really just proves how much harder they will have to work to be better. To become real pro-heroes. Aizawa materialized in front of them in his hero outfit, all scuffed up but otherwise intact. He looked even more tired than other days. It was as expected though. He had beaten up more than 50 villains by himself and came out unharmed. Behind him stood three distracted teenagers. Her gaze shifted over to the three boys eyeing the building. They were all wearing the same uniform. A sleeveless black top that clung to their toned torsos, dark cargo breathes lifted up by a leather utility belt strapped around their hips, and stained red combat boots laced up to their shins. The taller ones had inklings, tattoos, of delicate floral murals on their skin. The dual-haired on with a bouquet of black and white roses with thorns over a burn scar that took up the right side of his face, and the violet-haired one a wreath of mauve hydrangeas around his neck like a permanent necklace. The green, smaller one's exposed limbs were tightly bandaged with white gauze stained in way too much dried red. Uraraka's eyes widened in concern and undoubtedly, a little fear. Oh yeah, and you have new classmates. These brats have just transferred from an international boarding academy and are currently on probation due to committing crimes that you can ask about yourselves. They will be a part of your class as of now. How did they manage to convince the school to let them transfer? Crimes? Villains? In a hero class? The whole class burst out into murmurs and sneaking glances, trying not to make eye contact with any of them. Aizawa glared so hard that he didn't even need to activate his quirk to shut them up. He turned to the three. Introduce yourselves so I can leave. The violet-haired one stepped up, giving off a laid-back vibe, but he offered a friendly grin. What up, I'm King and these are my ride-or-die bros for life. He ruffled up Izuku's hair, listening to the smaller male groan and swat him like a fly. This lil green bunny is Kore. Before he leaned to sling his arm around the dual-haired one. And this icy beach is Joan, which earned an instant, brutal knee to the gut from the set-off heterochromatic boy. Who's the effing beach now? Joan imitated King's voice in a mocking tone and was physically restrained from kicking the winded guy again by the small greenette. Meanwhile, Class 1A watched on with mixed curiosity and a slight fear for the violet-haired one currently on the floor, wheezing in pain but mostly eager to introduce themselves. Except for one. Bakugo Katsuki was sure it was him. It had to be. But those eyes. They didn't belong to the meek little boy he used to know. Deku? For the first time, his voice was unsteady, shaken even. The greenette turned around, focusing his hardened monochrome gaze on Katsuki. Oh, so you've made it after all, Katsuki. His lips upturned in a condescending smirk as he tilted his pretty little face at a 45-degree angle. Congratulations. Bloody red eyes glazed over in rage as the all-too-familiar blonde explodes into dramatic yelling. What the F are you doing here, you shitty nerd? Izuku was seemingly unfazed, playing with a strand of his hair as he stuck to the script. Didn't you hear, Mr. Eraserhead? I'm transferred here. Then where in the living F have you been all these years? How very strange. His tone, under all that blunt force, almost sounded desperate. But Izuku wasn't breaking that easy. Abroad. I was given the opportunity for a better education overseas, so I accepted the generous offer. Silence. This must be the calm before a massive but storm. Izuku was right. The blonde stalked up to him, building up pressure with every step he took, and yanked Izuku up by his black shirt and proceeded to yell at his face incoherently. Well, not really incoherent, but after the initial shock Izuku kind of tuned out, listening to the vicious insults and profanity bleed into nothing but white noise. A skill that he had perfected over the years apparently. He looked over at Shudo and Hitoshi, who appeared a little smug of all things, finding the situation amusing above all else, and decided to stand by and watch the little green weed suffer. His former bully had finally finished his long-winded rant, and what was left in his expression seemed awfully close to an actual human emotion apart from anger. Did you even care about Auntie? The tone was soft. Dangerous. The mood had shifted. Izuku narrowed his eyes, pupils shrinking into oblivion, seeming to leave only a blank concrete stare while tilting his head sharply, audible cracks running down his neck making everyone cringe. What's the point even if I did? She's dead. The words were blunt and the expression on the greenette's face was boredom. At this point, Aizawa had to pull Bakugo off of the green before the blonde ball of anger issues could lunge for the problem child's bandaged throat. The dorms were as prestigious as the academy's pride. Newly furnished and decorated kitchen, common room, living room, hallway, and around 3 stories of individual dorms with locks. As the hero went through the roster, assigning every student to their place, the 3 boys took residence on the top floor, a joined room with 3 single beds and miraculously, cardboard packages full of their personal items lying on the spacious floor. They didn't walk in though, just standing with their arms folded, waiting for the intruder to come out. Damn it, you brats. An extremely tall, curly-haired woman in her late 20s stepped out of the shadows, her crystal blue eyes 1,000 shades of agitated as her cocoa skin darkened with frustration. She was dressed in the same uniform apart from the navy blue cross branded over her mask instead of their bloody red, and bore a heavy trench coat with the ends dipped in a strange red. It was blood, in case you didn't catch on. It was blood. Maria, so nice to see you again. Shinso tried. Maria wasn't buying it. And she's off. How many times do I have to tell you to not get caught? Do you do this on purpose just to give me more work? I swear, this is the last nice thing I'm ever doing for you lil sheets. Can you for effing once in your life be good children and do what you're told without thinking it up? At least the trio had enough shame left in their dead but souls to look sorry for what they did. We're sorry, Maria. Izuku even added a little lip tremble in full view as he stared at the floor. The prickly ravenettes softened a little at the sight. Damn it. She's always had a real soft spot for her little brothers. Her very irritating, definitely effed in the head, little brothers. Look, just don't get into any more stupid shit and get caught in the future, okay? I'll try and get boss man to forgive you and let you back soon. But till then, just keep out of trouble and do not draw attention. You hear me? You little BSTRDS create the enough paperwork to last me a lifetime. The three teenagers brightened up a little at the prospect of not being on the dangerous woman's hit list before she continued, her voice hardening to the same density as her crystal eyes. You are still required to complete undercover missions and report back to me. Got it? She reached into the insides of her trench coat and pulled out a large beige envelope with the front labeled, "To the FING idiots," and passed it along to Shudo, the most reliable one out of the three, which really wasn't saying much, before flipping them off with both hands and disappearing into the shadows of the open wardrobe. Has anyone ever told her that her quirk is basically the concept of the lion, the witch, and the wardrobe? That's certain suicide Zuku. Dope. Remind me to tell her next time. Kirishima Ijiro had grouped up the Baku squad, excluding Bakugo. He was still a bit prickly from the encounter earlier, as well as Ida Tenya and Uraraka Ochako to visit their new classmates. He hesitated a bit at the identical mahogany door before pushing past his insecurity and knocking on the door with confidence. Muffled laughter. Bass-boosted music. Before the dual-haired teenager who had assaulted the purple-haired one from this morning opened the door an inch and gazing at them with passive curiosity. "Can I help you with anything?" His words were lightly accented with a gentle roll on his tongue that they hadn't noticed before. The only word that could describe his face was pretty. The boy had thick eyelashes coating his unique eyes, and the inkling of the flowers gave his high cheekbones even more definition. "Thus, we're here to introduce ourselves as your new classmates and help you unpack as a sign of peer solidarity." Ida spoke stiffly as always, his tense arms wound up like a toy soldier, moving up and down like a robot with only one function. Of course, come in." The dual-haired boy stepped aside to let them in. Holy shit, this is a new record. They startled at the near-hysterical voice rivaling present mix charisma and directed their attention to its source. The green-haired kid from this morning was flinging multiple knives into the air and catching them in their descent, repeating the process all while moving hypnotically to the heavy, accented beats from the booming speakers. King, the one that had spoken to them the most, was laughing his butt off, filming from the bare mattress on the floor. There were actually 3 mattresses, but the other 2 were aligned against the wall for some unknown reason. "Fellow classmate, this is highly dangerous activity and I must request that you stop immediately." Ida all but screeched in panic as the others stood, paralyzed in shock. Surprisingly, the green obeyed, letting the blade fall naturally into his palms one by one before placing them on a makeshift table next to the third window on their right. DMN. What a buskill. The tired boy seemed to have collected himself enough to pay attention to the new people. Hello. Who might you guys be?" The boy smiled a little and the atmosphere of the room eased, a gentle ray of light lighting up the boy's adorable freckles and forest-like curls with a spring-toned innocence. His slender frame moving under an oversized gray sweater bunching around his waist comfortably, and the soothing floral scent that musked the room somehow reminded the Yuta students of vague memories that they never knew even existed. Uraraka recovered from her mental whiplash first and stuttered an intro, mumbling far too much to comprehend. They eventually snapped out of the shock and were seated on the bare mattress while the heterochromatic boy offered them unmarked bottles of clear liquid, "Please let it be water," and tossing the same bottle to his roommates. The room itself was 3 times the size of the normal dorms, including 3 single beds, all disassembled for some reason, 3 desks and even 3 bookshelves. Other than that, plain cardboard boxes were strewn across the place haphazardly. "So, that's an interesting uniform you got there. Where did you go to school?" Kirishima tried to make conversation with the transfers. Hitoshi, a better liar than gluten-free rice, didn't miss a beat. "We're from a small private school off the coast of Europe. Our curriculum requires a lot of physical activity, so naturally, our gear had to be catering. The combination of colors separate different courses so nobody would get mixed up. Also black and doesn't stain as much. That's so freaking cool." The rest of the group relaxed a little bit over time, even eventually introducing themselves in an awkward manner. Flex Tape's name is Siro Hanta, Pikachu is Kaminari Denki, Acid Chic with the inverted eyes is Mina Ashido, Pink Cheeks is Uraraka Ochako, and the guy with the engines is Ida Tenya. Izuku smirked behind his hand as he listened to Hitoshi molding half-truths into made-up stories from their old school, and watching on as the little kiddos bought every word. Man, heroes sure are gullible. Redhead Shark Boy, or Kirishima Ijiro, was strangely curious about Izuku's relationship with Bakubro, so he obliged and started to spin up a story while unpacking huge boxes of paperbacks with colorful markings and folded bookmarks. Well, me and Bakugo were childhood friends since our mothers were best friends, but because I didn't develop a quirk, we distanced apart and he started to pick on me with his lackeys. Kirishima's eyes widened by just a fraction. He glanced at the other two, but there was no surprise in their expressions. Anyway, that went on 4.9 years? Give or take. Middle school was by far the worst. He would beat me up in clear view of other students and teachers who did nothing. He would purposely scar me where others couldn't see. The greenette gestured at his bandaged neck and torso casually. And just petty insults and digs at my self-esteem in general. He shrugged it off like it was nothing. The Baku squad was horrified. How could their friend do such cruel things to a quirkless boy? King walked up behind the greenette and smacked a pamphlet written in English into the back of his head. Look at that, you scared the poor visitors. Korei gave a light-hearted chuckle, throwing everyone into confusion. Wait, so that was a lie? Mina blatantly asked in a mix of confusion and irritation. Korei shook his head. You'll have to figure that out for yourself, sweetie. I already told my side of the story. How can you be so chill about it? Pikachu was looking at Izuku with that hideous mix of pity and worry. The greenette couldn't help but cringe internally. How long has it been since he had been given one of those looks? I got over it, I guess. With spite mostly. The little green bean just shrugged it off. Leaving me with severe anxiety and depression, the all-round great aftermath of bullying, but there are shittier things in my past. The Baku squad stared at Izuku as if he just grew two heads. Uraraka tried to break the silence with questions for the other two. Are those tattoos real? The two boys nodded while the dual-haired one reached for an open box, emptying out pages of simple to complex mural designs. We're allowed to get tattoos and piercings of our own accord. King explained as he looked over at Korei, currently sticking all his notes and ongoing experiments on the free wall. That guy has the most out of both of us and holds a reputation for being the best tattoo artist in our building. The greenette hummed a little, pulling up his tucked-in black singlet to reveal the corner of a giant ink design starting at his defined hip. So, it's our turn to ask questions then. King conjured up a chair out of thin air and plopped down in front of the couch. How many people are in this class actually? Ida took this question as a blessing and promptly pulled out a full roster of the hero class and started to explain while the others joined in with smartass comments for the hell of it. Sparkles, Frog Girl, Tail Guy, Soft Rock Boi, Kylie Jenner, Buff Ninja with Arms, Punk AUX Cord, Emo Bird, Invisi Girl, Gross Grape, High Class Ponytail, and Todoroki Shudo. Simultaneously, the boys nearly spat out their drinks. Holy F-. Two started to break into uncontrollable wheezing on the spot, even to the point where their whole bodies shook and the dual-haired one was left to glare at them with intense malice. The others were confused as F from the sudden outbreak. Shudo could only stare at the picture of the emotionless, white-haired boy in the picture with dull turquoise eyes in seat no. "Ce que la baise real." The dual-haired boy's words only made the other two laugh even harder. What's so funny? Kaminari looked perplexed. Shudo gave a tight grin as he barely resisted the temptation of stabbing his roommates. Barely. Instead, he ignored the crying laughing from both of them and answered the question. Nothing. The name sounds pretty familiar is all. Todoroki Shudo sat in his Japanese-themed room, staring off into nothing. There was an odd wave of calm in the design, but the sensation might as well have been stabbing him in the gut. A real irony. Home and hell at the exact same time. Upstairs, he could hear the muffled laughter and conversations of his classmates. His rivals. Some part of him just wanted to shut them all out and crawl into a quiet space, but as the laughter faded along with the sun, he grew to miss the sound. A knock at the door brought him to his feet. He walked to open the door and came face to face with the dual-haired boy that attacked his friend from this morning. The boy's mismatched eyes seemed to scan Todoroki up and down before finally speaking. "Sup? We're your new neighbors." He gestured towards the two other new students, conversing in the corridor. "Just wanted to see if you were hungry and if you wanted to grab something to eat with us." The offer was casual. No order. No force. Todoroki kept his face blank. "You should ask the others." The three just shrugged. "If you don't want to, it's fine." And they walked off. But the dual-haired one turned back, their eyes locked on one last time. His crimson scar shone through the lines of his tattoo, heterochromatic pupils slit like a cat, mischievous grin plastered on his face, messy red and glossy black hair giving Todoroki Shudo goosebumps for no reason as the new students disappeared down the hallway. After a really awkward dinner, the class of 1A decided collectively, that they'll have a competition for best room. Bakugo had locked himself in his room, ignoring even Kirishima when they tried to knock on the door. To be fair, the entire Baku squad needed a bit of time to process the little greenette's words, but they couldn't bear with the notion that Bakugo was a bully. They insisted on a room competition as a distraction from their own doubts. The atmosphere is a bit awkward, an invisible trench of observation and somewhat subtle avoidance between the new trio and the rest of the class. But as they neared the first room, excitement started to pick up and the night was in full swing. Birdman / Tokoyami Fumicage's room was a little too emo-goth for everyone, but Hitoshi appreciated the aesthetic. Skulls, dark indigo lighting, capes, and a true Victorian-era vibe. Solid 7/10, -3 for the use of fake candles. "So this is what guys are into," Mina wondered around, gazing up at the dark drapes. "Hey, I used to have this keychain in middle school." Kirishima picked up a little metallic sword hanging of a chain from the table. This basically ended with a "get the hell out" from the embarrassed and currently in an existential crisis, Bird. Sparkle Boy's room was so sparkly. Nothing would ever convince Shudo that a person could stay sane in this room. A literal disco ball sat on display like an ugly vase, but he had to admit, it did suit his appearance. He blinked a few times, trying to adjust his vision to all the light, but eventually gave up and walked out. "All right. The only one left on this floor is..." Pink Cheeks abruptly stopped as they all spotted the dark aura coming out of the disgusting grape store. "Come on in, I'll show you something amazing." They walked into the elevator in mutual agreement. Tailman's room was blessedly normal. A calendar, laptop, books, neutral colors, and a nice blank wall was definitely more Shudo style. Nothing out of the ordinary, nothing out of place. Was it so normal? "Yeah, so this is what normal looks like." Tails hid his face in his hands as he muttered something about the not needing to compliment it. Roboglass's room was somewhat normal if you ignore the ridiculous number of eyewear displayed on the shelves over his desk. Izuku ignored the rest as he examined all the stockpile of paperbacks and textbooks lining the shelves. Mostly dull subjects like high school geometry. A few English notebooks in the midst of the stacks, but Izuku didn't bother with it too much. Pikachu's area was a mess. A few okay pieces of furniture was scattered around the room, but the combination was unacceptable. Gaudy really was the word for it. Izuku's eyes caught a pair of bright red sneakers displayed on the shelving, wondering why he was so drawn to the flashy design. Shrugging it off, they moved on to the next room. Softrock's room was undeniably plain, but the atmosphere was better than a forest without FANG ghosts. The quilt covers were hand-sewed and positively adorable, and a cute crochet basket with checkered fabric next to a simple white desk gave them all a pretty good insight on this boy's personality. There was even a bunny. They were sold. The girls started to coo over the snow-white rabbit with glistening crimson eyes. Those pupils seemed to stare into the trio's souls, or what is left of it anyway. After a bit of bickering, the girls displayed their own rooms, much to the delight of Moldy Grape. It really is disgusting how the midget blatantly lusts over his classmates, making everyone feel uncomfortable and violated in the process. So they ignored him and moved on. Nothing really popped, the competition eventually blurring into a mindless gap of time Hitoshi could feel withering away from him. Earjack's chic was definitely more his style in terms of music and aesthetic, but even then he could practically feel the jet lag of 2 consecutive days of being awake. Because nobody actually sleeps in prison, finally getting a grip of his ankles, pulling him down. They walked into the resident pretty boys, the white-haired one, room to find tatami spread floors and traditional sliding doors, making the girls stare in shock and the boys cry in outrage. Todoroki didn't pay much attention to the commentary and instead, sneaking glances at the dual-haired transfer student as he explored the room. Light amusement spread across his features along with another emotion that Todoroki couldn't quite decipher before his neutral expression covered it. Finally, they reached the 5th floor. Izuku moved forward to slot in a key that's definitely not the same locks as the others and swung it wide open. Everyone gaped, even the Baku squad, whom had just been in the room a few hours prior. The room itself was the same size as 3 single rooms, so there was a fair bit of space for everyone to walk in. The perfectly blank wall that they faced with the balcony was now completely covered in newspaper clippings in every single language neatly tacked on with crimson-red strings connecting specific pieces together like a giant puzzle. Colorful sticky notes with messy, cursive and frankly unreadable scribbles filling in the gaps just like an ongoing police investigation in movies. The 3 single mattresses were pushed together to create a single, monster-sized bed equipped with grid black and white-colored sheets, pushed against the right wall. The floor was absolute chaos. Vinyl cases labeled in cryptic symbols made Jiro silently fangirl in the corner. Shinso grinned a little. At least someone other than Izuku is finally appreciating his taste. 3 desks were scattered in different corners of the room. One perfectly neat save for a beige-colored envelope lying face down and a half-filled cup of water, with a single white rose on display. The other one was stacked up with video game consoles and CDs, from Mario Kart to CSGO. The whole 9 yards stacked sky-high in messy piles. The last one had strange liquids that glowed different colors in lighting, all labeled, "Fragile Do Not Touch" on the individual test tubes. The most chaotic wall was definitely the bookshelf, which basically consisted of the actual provided storage as well as what used to be the bedposts, ripped apart and nailed to the wall as a sort of extension. Heavy bound. Scrapbooks of some kind with black covers were visibly bursting at the seams with stuck-on pieces of paper and pictures. Analysis VXI, read the sticker on one of them. The wardrobes had been shoved side by side next to the mattresses, seemed to be the only thing still semi-normal in the room. Apart from that, multiple glass jars filled with preserved camellias and with fairy lights lit up the dim room, casting indented shadows along the furniture. Everybody just kinda stood there to take in the scenery. A few compliments and a lot more unspoken questions echoed around the room as the moonlight poured through the windows, casting an eerie shadow over the trio, only their strangely bright, slit pupils visible under the coat of shadows, tracking their every move like predators. The new transfer students seemed nice, but their gut instincts screamed for them to run the other direction and never look back. Needless to say, none of them slept well after. Aizawa turned up in class the next morning to find his students, dark circles under their eyes all except for Bakugo, Hakigure, for obvious reasons, and 2 out of the 3 transfer students. He was willing to bet that the violet one always looked like that. He let out an exhausted sigh and observed his new students a bit more. The 3 wore the UA shirts open and revealing their own uniform underneath. Korei had abandoned the black skin-tight singlet and instead, just letting his bloodied bandages cover his exposed torso up to his neck. They sat in the back row and conversed casually amongst each other. Today you all are going to be skirting the new transfers around and helping them out with locations. Good night. With that, he fully zipped up his amazingly yellow sleeping bag, closed his eyes and wished for the world to just go F itself. The class looked around nervously as they heard a distant tapping noise coming from the back. They all turned around, even Bakugo, who nearly gave himself whiplash, to see Korei typing on a laptop he took out from thin air. Gray eyes completely focused on the screen as he simultaneously chatted with Joan, something about sending the prick a present he won't forget. After around 10 seconds of hellish silence, Bakugo couldn't stand the shitty tension anymore and yanked the Deku's laptop out of reach before promptly tossing it out the open window. Despite yesterday's encounter, Something inside him wanted to test Deku's boundaries. After all, what can he possibly do? Shitty. Quirkless. Waste of space. A trembling Deku. He had expected fear in Deku's worthless eyes and a stutter on his lips. Instead, he stared at the empty space where the greenette had sat moments before. The rest of the class gaped in horror as they stood paralyzed, watching on as the boy jumped out the third-story window without hesitation. F.I.N.G. Again! They snapped their necks to face the set-off Lavender One as he pinched the bridge of his nose. Dual-haired boy just smirked and held out his hand in a beckoning motion from his chair. Called it. Now pay up. Uraraka burst out in a cry of panic just as the Euros exchanged hands. Don't you care? He could be dead. She was just about to float Aizawa-sensei to wake him up and tell him that his student is dead, but at that exact moment, the door slammed open to reveal a nonchalant greenette, hands in breath pockets, intact laptop under his arm and leg raised from kicking the door. You fuckers had a bet? His slow and methodic the brought out goosebumps under their skin, but there was an amused smile that lit up his delicate features. Nobody in the room had the ball to answer, but Hitoshi didn't even hesitate. Yeet. Izuku tilted his head in curiosity. Who won? Izuku was an enigma to anyone who lays eyes on him. Boy or girl? Child or adult? After mere minutes of talking to the cryptic, however, people would realize that the mystery runs far deeper than his physical appearance. Thing is, communicating with the cryptic, also known as Izuku, may result in permanent brain damage. Was that his quirk? Many would jump to this conclusion, but no. This was an inherent gift bestowed upon him through genetics even before the incident. His voice catches people off guard all the time, pulls them into the current and whipping them round and round in circles like they weighed absolutely nothing before they end up even further away from the truth than where they had started. His marble-like face resembled closely to that of a lovely statue, forever unmoving but with such terrifying realism that he could be passed off as human only in a photo frame. His freckles glittered in the sunlight that traveled across his cheekbones and nose bridge like constellations, random at first glance but carefully carved into his very soul if you look a bit closer. The grace of a swan, the charisma of a natural-born performer, the pride of a god. See, Persephone's energy coursed through his veins and Hade's magic pooled just underneath his skin. He's changed. Fundamentally, right down to the very fibers of his DNA, he had changed. He may be quirkless, but he is so much more powerful than everybody on this plane of existence. A list of powers/pseudo-quirks revealed so far, if you really must put a label on it. Shadow traveling, the ability to slip into shadows of anyone/anything and transport anywhere as long as there is a shadow, a specific power belonging and unique to the beings of the underworld. Persephone had been granted special privilege to this ability when she married to Hades. Izuku had practiced with this power the most. When he had thrown himself out the window earlier that morning, he wasn't being reckless. He knew what he was capable of. He maneuvered to the air through physics and common sense, snatching his laptop with his right hand, outstretching his left and dissolved into the shadow of the building. Shadows were like a quiet space. A room? A space was the best way to describe it. A tiny pocket made for him. A little spot in the galaxy made just for him. A gift, perhaps? A blessing in the peace that is solitude. He had figured out a long time ago how to navigate his body to naturally slip in and out of this godforsaken world. He willed his body to appear in front of the closed-off 1A door, about to open the entrance before he overheard two very familiar voices talking. Called it, pay up? Izuku never really understood the immense power that he had been gifted with. This kind of sheet usually came with no instruction manuals. He just kind of figured it out during his visits with the appealing woman that had radiated platonic love and familial affection that he had only ever felt from his mother, but even then, it was usually more worry that laced her words rather than the comforting silence that shrouded their meetings. He had initiated conversation with the ethereal being on their third encounter. So, Miss Dash, you don't have to be so formal, dear. The woman's voice was strangely addictive, a perfect mixture of rasp and legato that traced her every syllable and a sweet melody that she seemed to follow like second instinct. Her accent seemed a mixture of everything, tuning her gentle endearment into something more. An inside joke just between the two of them. I was wondering, why did you save me? He wasn't an idiot. There may have been no physical evidence that the beauty had saved him, but his memories didn't lie. Neither did his intuition. The woman just breathed out a gentle laugh, the same texture as the late autumn wind, as her glittering gray eyes dipped in amusement for the sharp, young boy sitting by her side. Because I like you, Izuku. You remind me of someone that I couldn't save a long time ago. Did Izuku really care about Bakugo Katsuki anymore? There was no denying the boy's crucial role in molding Izuku to what he is today. His explosive temperament and cruel behavior had made Izuku wary. So very wary of new people. It had taken months for Izuku to allow himself to rely on Shinso and Shudo. He still remembers those days. He would barely talk to them, only if the situation absolutely called for it. He avoided all physical contact, opting for far-range weapons like firearms for his first few missions. He may be powerful beyond belief, but his soul had been broken beyond repair from his torturous childhood years. His only solace was dying. He had felt guilty about it the first couple of times. What if they find him? What if they freak out? He had never told them of his quirk, after all. It hadn't occurred to him that despite their subtle differences, his partners had gone through their fair share of fed-up shit that had molded them into who they were as humans. As the DMN best hitmen in the modern-day industry. The day Midoriya Inko had passed away, Izuku had just completed his 45th mission. He had been called into Mr. Hisashi's office and had been given the news personally. It was strange, almost poetic in a way, to see someone that had been nothing short of a father figure to him delivering the news with a stone heart. No words of comfort. No nothing. Shudo and Hitoshi had offered to go along with him, but he just pulled on a terribly fake smile. Everything will be okay. He bore his best suit, dyed his hair black, borrowing Shudo's dye, and booked the next plane to Japan for the funeral. All the information had been handed to him, and he looked over it with dulled eyes on his business class seat. Midoriya Inko, deceased. Relations: Agent number 7785, biological mother. Official report: Mrs. Midoriya left her house on 15 July XX at 13. Caught up in a hero and villain battle. Hero alias Kamui Wood. Suffered multiple lacerations, internal bleeding and head trauma. Passed away in ER at 21. Inside the portfolio, a single blank CD rested in an unmarked case. With numbness, his fingers fumbled with the hook in his laptop but eventually pushed the CD in and pressed play. The battle was pointless. Utterly unnecessary by any and all standards. His mother had been used as a meat shield, and her final blow had been bloody FNG building, crushing her tiny body under the rubble and debris. Nobody helped her. They just stood by, discarding her as unimportant, and instead left her to the emergency rescuers. The heroes did nothing. But his mother was innocent. How could they? His tears fell, bitter and silent. He kept replaying the scene, watching his mother's strained face filled with pain and suffering as her thin body was dragged out like a sack of flour. The way everybody ignored the poor woman, shoving their microphones and attention at them. They were useless. All of them. They didn't deserve the title that he could never reach. None of them. The three were unnervingly intelligent. Present Mike took first PRD with Class 1A. He learnt this the hard way. Defenestration, the act of throwing someone out a window. The dual-haired one read aloud in fluent English to his partners. Does it still count if you throw yourself out a window? The greenette asked in a curious fashion. Literally nobody would throw themselves out a window but you, Kore. Lavender huffed, seeming to be a little bit agitated. Doors are for the weak, bro. This wasn't even the topic of the day, but since they had completed the grammar sheet and spelling quiz at the speed of light, he just let them go plus ultra and do whatever they wanted as long as it was in English. Honestly, he was not prepared for the students to pull out their phones after the 20-minute mark, punching in numbers and making calls God knows where, speaking in a low, hushed-up tones, but he managed to catch a few words. I don't give a flying F dash. Say that again and, The words leaving the violet one's lips were foul but concise, and something in his pauses that showed he was dead serious on following through with his threats. Thank God he spoke too fast that no one apart from present Mike to understand. The rest of the students seemed uncomfortable in their presence, and Hisashi couldn't blame them. The three boys radiated a frigid, uneasy vibe underneath that casual disposition. Not even Ida Tenya dared to interrupt the definitely inappropriate use of class time. The silence was heavy, every head intent on listening to their disturbing conversations. Needless to say, present Mike bolted out of the class as soon as the bell ended, not even bothering to assign homework. He prayed silently that his next lesson with the class would never arrive. God, this must be how Aizawa feels. May God have mercy on the other teachers. Ken Ishiyama has witnessed a lot of downright mentally scarring acts of cruelty and violence during his time as a pro hero. However, nothing will save him from the mental shock of one of his students jumping out the literal window in the middle of his speech. Nobody flinched, just kinda glanced out the open window for a split second before turning back to copy down more notes. The two other new students, whom stood out a lot, just sighed and walked out the door, saying something about bringing him back. They didn't come back. Lunchtime rolled around and everyone tried to move on. The boys were still missing, and a brave few, including most of the class, minus Bakugo and Mineta, split off into subgroups to locate the missing classmates. Uraraka stepped out into the fresh afternoon breeze with Ida by her side as she hesitantly wondered where they would be. Eventually she spotted a flash of green by a large oak tree on the very edge of the school grounds. She edged closer, shushing Ida as they cautiously approached the boy at the base of the tree. The greenette's striking gray eyes were closed as he leaned heavily against the tree's support. He was asleep, face turned upwards as the lazy sun made his star-like freckles and cool marble skin glow through the parted leaves. She was at a loss for what to do. He seemed so peaceful, the sardonic sneer and unintentional barriers all faded away with every breath he took. Uraraka-san? A calm voice washed over like lazy waves. She whipped around to find her violet-haired classmate, holding what she assumed was a cup of coffee, the steam billowing out through the tiny opening. He looked over her his extra height, catching a glimpse of his sleeping friend, and sighed. Yeah, he does that sometimes. Sorry about skipping the last class, but we can't wake him up in this state. King seemed nice. The hostility she felt from him during present mixed class had dissipated, leaving nothing but the tired, smiling boy in front of her. Yeah, he sleeps like the dead. An amused, disattached voice came from the actual tree branches, and the dual-haired one appeared from the covers of the leaves. Upside down. His long legs curled around a particular branch and toned upper body relaxed as his ruffled his went with gravity, revealing the full extent of his faded scar and bold black mural embedded over it. Oh, well, it's lunchtime now, so do you want us to accompany you? Ida couldn't hold back the stutter as he stared at the unusual scene. HM? Oh, it's okay, don't worry. We'll come by the cafeteria later when Korei's up and running. As the UA students retreated into the distance, Hitoshi let his smile drop as he sipped in the bitter coffee he had brought from down the street. Honestly, the shackle/quirk nullifying bracelets were a beach to take off, but eventually he figured a way to overload the circuits through outside sources, or basically electrocuting the DMN thing until it self-imploded using bits of wires and a charger Izuku always keeps in his pocket. The GPS tracker they planted within the shackles had been removed and attached to Izuku's bracelet because hello, he's dead half the time, so the least he can do is take the fall for them if need be. Hitoshi tossed the upside-down boy a Happy Meal bag from which Shudo caught the handle effortlessly and flipped out of the tree, landing with more grace than a cat. They sat at the base of the tree leaning against the sleeping green boy, sharing chicken nuggets and staring off into the clouds while sticking little dandelion flowers into their little greenette's curly locks. It was oddly peaceful for such a fed-up situation. Izuku woke up from the first nap he's had in years. He figured that since he was out in public, offing himself wouldn't be optimal. Waking up to screaming was something that he truly despised. Jesus, shut the F up would you? The 12-year-old Izuku yelled over raw, unadulterated screaming coming from the figures in blood-stained smocks and surgical masks. He glanced down and realized why they were screaming. His entrails were clearly visible, intestines 3/4 out of his body but still somewhat attached to his organs and blood pouring out in buckets, staining the metal table he sat on. He wondered why his injuries hadn't healed yet. Maybe it was the giant but-for drip puncturing his arm with a strange neon liquid, somehow still keeping the wounds open. He didn't really care about that though. He didn't need to care about that anymore. Apparently his quirk completely shuts down his pain receptors since, well, they were kind of useless now considering that he can't die even if he wanted to. Instead, his mind was filled to the brim and overflowing with an all-too-familiar rage and hatred. Just the thought of someone touching his skin without consent was enough to make him want to rip out that person's throat and shove it back through their mouth. Key point is, he utterly loathes physical contact with strangers. The two figures were saved from their dooming fate as the metal doorframe creaked open to find the same snake-like man that had shot him point-blank. He leaned against the doorway, narrowed eyes on Izuku's innards and probably, almost definitely, murderous glare. "You've passed. Welcome to the Syndicate." OFING hell. All Might walked into the classroom for hero training with Class 1A, along with 3 teenage hitmen. Now, All Might was no optimist. He is the farthest thing off from positivity. His indicative willingness to save people is mostly fueled by his own self-sacrificial disposition and neglective attitude towards his own safety with or without one for all pumping in his veins. Now, having literal murder children in his hero class had devastating effects on his sanity, but nevertheless, he stood his ground for the sake of his students and walked in proud. Weirdest thing was, he felt like he's seen the gray-eyed boy before. His intense, non-blinking gaze dissecting everything and anything in front of him down to an atomic level before putting them back together again. His freckled doll face had slipped into the shadows of his long-forgotten memories, but those eyes stayed prominent, imprinting itself into his mind. Go for the eyes, Mr. All Might. The thing's weakness is its eyes. A melancholic vibration undertoned the mysterious boy's fragile voice, cold and harsh like a hellish hailstorm. Paralyzing shock ran through his deflated body. How did he know that his citizen form was All Might? The young boy had slick-back raven hair, too glossy to be natural, an ironed black suit with a white collared shirt underneath and rose-tinted shades hiding his eyes from the rest of the world as he casually sipped on an unbranded juice box, making him look like a mobster's son. All Might still had the height advantage and the exact angle to catch a glimpse behind those reflective shades. Hatred. Everything bright and happy seemed to off itself, slit their wrists and drown in his cruel, laughing pupils. The boy filled him up with a frigid sense of dread unlike any other villain. The boy's cruel gaze rivaled his mortal nemesis in calculative strides, and the hidden estosim in the twitching of his lips reminded him of the very incident that had left him this way. He had walked away from the scene then, melting into the crowd and completely immersing his tailored hemmings and a strange red stain on his otherwise spotless shoes into oblivion. All Might had activated his quirk after a moment's hesitation and saved the blonde boy who would later become his students and a future hero. He was willing to bet his own quirk that the green-haired one was the exact same boy he had met a year ago. He looked softer by all means, faded freckles adorning his marble cheekbones and button nose, slightly tinted gray lips, strands of natural forest green hair curling to frame his doll face and the rest tied back into a small poof of curls behind his slim neck. His uniform was certainly edgy, in the best sense of the word. Bloodied gauze clung to the soft curves and sharp planes of his torso and slim arms. His expression was a fraction warmer than the frigid depths of hell. All Might had dreaded this run-in for the whole entire day now. The larger-than-life American hero stood in front of the teacher's desk in a weirdly formal mustard suit and a fake smile. Izuku didn't move from his relaxed position, his slim and bandaged fingers twirling a piercing on his right ear underneath his lovely emerald curls with an absent mind. He knows that the blonde man remembers him. His advice from a year ago. He could see the fear simmering, threatening to overflow. That look made him look weak. So weak it was laughable. He loathes that look with every fiber of his inhumane vessel. It made him reminisce of his own eyes buried under cement and yards duct tape in his memories. Every corner he turns, Every time he catches the reflection of a scrawny emerald-haired child with rivers pouring from his eyes and those green eyes, it fills him up with an incomprehensible amount of disgust. But he's seen that face more times on every single target he had slaughtered. None of them has ever affected them quite like his own past. How poetic! The ghost pain around his neck, his long-healed scars all over his disfigured torso, arms, and his cracked soul made him who he was. His own pain and suffering made others writhe, squirm, and cry for mercy. How poetic indeed! The locker room scene became far more awkward than it should be. The three didn't have a hero costume, per se, but apparently they had been given gifts that remained behind a lock in the changing rooms. Nobody actually gave them the locker combinations, so Shuto eased a hairpin from his right side and passed it to Izuku who, bless his abyss of a heart, a FING god at the art of lock-picking, promptly opened 3 lockers in the span of 30 seconds or less. Oh, sheet! Baby Shark breathed out as his eyes roamed over to the trio from his spot in the room. Everybody glanced over to where Kirishima's wide eyes were focused on and their jaws hit the floor. The three had begun to strap multiple sheathed knives to hooks and holsters along their waist belt and thighs. The efficiency in their movements was smoother than that of a well-oiled machine. They were long done before anybody else did and walked out in oblivion to everybody's glances. Everybody walked out into the field to find All Might standing next to the transfer students in a tense silence. Was that relief flashing in the number 1 hero's eyes just now? Too late to find out now. All Might started to explain today's training course. You will all pick a partner and spar individually and one at a time so your classmates can observe. The winner of the round will advance and verse against winners of the other teams. The student left standing will be the winner. It was a simple exercise, but Aizawa had personally asked him to instill it just for today. Probably to further observe the terrifying kids. Everybody in the class already had their mini-cliques and most of the class had already chosen their partners. Bakugo ended up yelling for the green-haired one to fight him, but the young transfer had already latched onto the taller purple male who in turn flipped off the angry blonde, all while putting his free arm around the smaller male, smirking. The dual-haired one went over to Endeavor's silent son, standing next to him with his arms crossed over. They shared similar height and muscle build, but while the air around Shuto radiated intimidation and nonchalance, the transfer glistened like a razor-sharp blade, seemingly cutting through the tense atmosphere between them. The pairings went like this. Floaty Face vs. Kermit. Shuto Todoroki 2.0 vs. The original. Green Cinnamon Roll of Death vs. Purple Eye Bags. Baby Shark vs. Pikachu. 3D Printer vs. Pink Acid. Grape Purr vs. The Angry One. Flex Tape vs. Sparkles. The Most Convenient Headphones vs. Edgy Burb. Invisy Chic vs. Tailman. Gotta Go Fast vs. Snow White. Kardashian Lips vs. Buff Ninja with Arms. Well, ain't this gonna be fun? Floaty Face really wasn't too out of shape for a student her age. She had good tactic and seemed competent enough to adapt her fighting style and quirk to take advantage of her opponent. She kept low, rushing forward and keeping her own weight lighter so that Kermit couldn't sweep her legs out from underneath with her tongue. Eventually, the match turned into a stalemate. Floaty reached her limits and promptly collapsed on sight, throwing up whatever she had for lunch. A sandwich? Really? Kermit offered to take her to Recovery Girl's office, and as they hobbled out into the distance, the next match has just started. Center V of Shuto stood stoic and serious in front of the more relaxed Halfie that Izuku knew all too well. Was he going with throwing blades this time? Oh wait, nope. Their Shuto pulled on a bloody terrifying grin, showing off his sharp canines and that horrifically twisted expression that made Izuku's stomach flutter a little. Well, if dash. Shuto Todoroki faced his opponent with a chilling gaze. It was the same boy that he had made eye contact with the day before. There was something off about his demeanor. Juxtaposed eyes seems to stare directly into his soul, reaching, searching for a slight hint of hesitation of discomfort racking his mind. It made him uncomfortable, but it didn't last long. Start. And they were off. Izuku watches on as his Halfie dodges a wall of ice with practical ease as he sidesteps into the kid's personal zone, bringing him down with a sharp elbow to the face. Shudo 2.0 was up in an instant, distancing himself as he seemed to recuperate before stepping into hand-to-hand combat with the original. The beatdown was brutal. Control. V took 3 heavy blows to the face consecutively before the second was even up. Copy took the attack surprisingly well, only letting out a low growl, but Shudo didn't give a single opening. He stepped in, snatching his opponent's gym uniform collar faster than anyone could react and promptly swept the ground from underneath him with his foot and the added momentum from his unbalanced mess of a stance. Trapping the copy with a bone-crushing chokehold, his long legs squeezing out the copy's internal organs and a pressured forearm completely blocking his windpipe, the silence ensued. 20 seconds. 25 seconds. Match over, transfer wins. Izuku and Hitoshi sighed with a mixture of disappointment and relief that their Shudo hadn't actually committed a homicide in the middle of class. It wasn't an exaggeration, mind you. Shudo's always been a loose cannon, even more so than Izuku actually. His only motivation for doing shit would be to spite someone else or purely for his own entertainment. One time he swallowed and digested an entire tube of somebody else's brand new toothpaste whilst staring their dorm neighbors dead in the eye simply because they borrowed his toothpaste without permission. He was sent to the ER on site with poisoning and went into a coma for 3 days, which was either the cause of downing FING toothpaste or the consecutive all-nighters he had pulled the month previous. The first thing that came out of his mouth when he woke up was, "Serves them right," before promptly passing out again. Back to the present. Shudo untangles himself from his stiff opponent and the other boys slumped gracelessly against the floor. Oops, he seems to have choked out the poor kid. I'll take him to the infirmary. The half-and-half scooped up the vanilla-haired boy in his arms bridal style before walking off into the horizon like some kind of bishy anime character in a cliché dating sim. Silence. Before Hitoshi and Izuku started bawling their eyes out in cry laughter, wheezing at their dramatic little beach performing his theatrics and at how shamelessly and straight-faced he remained as he managed to pull it all off. That was $10 lost from both their pockets, but it was well worth it. Believe he actually went through with that. The little greenette managed to breath out in between his laughing fits. They high-fived each other like a bunch of rowdy idiots before finally straightening themselves out and observing the clearly uncomfortable hero with expectation and amusement somewhere behind those blank eyes. It was their turn next. As the saying goes, you either die a hero or see yourself live long enough to be a villain. This was true in some sense of the phrase. Hitoshi's body had lived on despite the bruising and the burns, but his mind had long been torn into little paper confetti, strewn around in his black hole of a psyche by some devil-looking thing. Apologies to the residents of the underworld that may take offense to this analogy, in a flaming leotard while singing off-key to "I Want It That Way" by the Backstreet Boys. Key point is, the boy was slowly going insane. Homicidal temptations. Constant disassociation. An occasional, who are we even kidding here, bout of self-deprecating. And that's not even scraping the surface of his far below average mental health. He was just a touch-starved and affection-deprived child, his own family throwing him in a steep ditch to perish as soon as his quirk had manifested. That stung. FING lot. He lived against the odds, barely surviving his fall, which had left him to deal with the unnecessary amount of blood pouring out of a gashing wound on his right inner thigh down to his shin. It got infected over time due to neglect and exposure to parasites and was slowly eating away at his body, but he kept moving, using his quirk to beg for food and sleeping in the frigid but shadowed alleyways. On his 6th birthday, he could barely drag himself from the filth of his blanket, overlapped newspapers dating back to 5 years ago, because of his basically rotting, crippled leg. He was starving, painfully aware of his hollowed cheekbones and mottled bruising leaking into his pale skin. He may have survived, but he didn't leave unscathed. The neighborhood kids took less than kindly to meek little beggar on the streets and took every opportunity to beat him into a bloody mess, mocking his situation and his general existence. This is it. He's going to die here. Alone. A nobody. He closed his heavy eyelids and prayed to a non-existent his somewhere up there for a better afterlife. Hey kid. He blinked out the last of his tears that slid a clear line down his dirt-coated cheek. What's your quirk? Hitoshi was bewildered. Who was this man? He loomed over Hitoshi's thin frame, but that dangerous glint in his snake-like eyes told him that if he anteed the boy dead, he would have already done it. Brainwashing, sir. The man raised his eyebrow in silent amusement before kneeling down to the collapsed boy's line of sight. He had freckles coated like stars over the marble planes of his sculpted face. My name is Hisashi, but you may call me Viper. If you want to live, then accept my proposal. Hitoshi wondered. Did he really deserve to live? Did he really have a purpose to go on? He made his decision after a long second. He does what he does to survive. Nothing more, nothing less. This was a complete lie. He does a lot of stupid shit for entertainment purposes and games to waste time. Life's a giant but puzzle for Hitoshi, and he would much rather procrastinate on thinking about how close he may get to death's door at any given opportunity in his occupation. Games seem to be his fixation. The methodical formulae to this absolute clusterfuck of madness that is reality. Hitoshi died the day of his 6th birthday. A monster had taken the little boy's place. Hitoshi and Izuku stepped into the outside rink. The rest of the class observed with tense curiosity as the two exchanged words in some European language, sharp and brief before they both pulled out their phones, scrolling a bit before placing them aside and turning to stare at All Might, ready for murder. All Might, the number one hero himself, felt his blood run cold but forced his voice to function. Start. Listen to Fall Out Boy, Phoenix with me while we fight. It'll be effing epic. Fine, but I'm choosing the song next time. Aight. Put on your war paint. Hitoshi vanished from view as Izuku brandished 2 gunless bayonets in his hands, twirling the glistening surface by the well-worn handles casually. You are a brick tied to me that's dragging me down. Hitoshi aimed for the little greenette's freckled face, materializing inches away from his face, and slammed the back of his head into the ground with brutal intensity. But the sound of contact of skull crushing into the floor never made it. Somersaulting midair as his center was forced forwards, sending his legs over, defying gravity, catching Hitoshi's shoulders as he trapped his face between his thighs and twisting, driving both their bodies into the floor. We are the jack-o'-lanterns in July, sending fire to the sky. Hitoshi pushed away the green little mop, not missing a beat as he unsheathed a hunting knife from the confines of his belt storage before slashing Izuku's face without hesitation. Here comes, this riding tide, so come in. Blood flooded down his marble face as the slash dug into his skull, exposing his bone underneath. The rest of the class cringed away with disgust and horror, eyes turning to their teacher for an intervention, but the almighty hero stayed glued to the same position just like his merchandise dolls. Put on you war paint. Ah! A resounding chuckle bubbled up in the boy's throat as the red liquid coat over his wide gray eye like a scar, his eyelashes deflecting most of it, keeping his eyes protected, but even so, a few rebellious drops seemed to mingle with his lens, pools gray slowly swirling in the seemingly endless sea of red. Cross walks and crossed hearts and hope to die. Seal the clouds with gray lining. Izuku smiled. Frankly, it was terrifying. The air around him dropped to the negatives, even more so than Shudo's ice, and the blood just continued to drip all the way down to the floor, creating a small puddle in its wake. His smile was deathly calm and his expression completely devoid of any innocence that had graced his face mere moments before. So we can take the world back from a heart attack. The blood reversed. One maniac at a time, we will take it back. His wound closed up. You know time goes on when you're waiting for the song to start. Hitoshi braced for hell itself, grinning like a madman. So dance along to the beat of your heart. Silence. Their blades impacted, leaving afterimages of their movements as the UA students watched on in utter awe and horror. They met blow for blow faster than the eye could trace, manic grins glued to their face like a terrifying Halloween mask. Despite fighting quirkless, the grounds around seemed to become polluted by something unnatural. Black tendrils seeped through every crack in the floors, rising up and moving like they are their own sentient beings. It was unnoticeable at first, but they seemed to stitch into the fabrics of reality, gripping the air around them and in turn, becoming darker by every passing moment. Give up. The bystanders flicked their attention from the now dissipating black shadows to the fighters. The greenette stood over the kneeling purple one, bandaged arm outstretched and waiting. The purple one choked out a strained laugh and grasped onto it like a lifeline, heavily relying on the grip to pull himself up. I really have created a monster, haven't I? Reluctant marvel laced his gruff tone, making the greenette light up like a puppy, innocence washing away the cold surface of his gray pupils. Your fault, not mine. King sighed far too heavily before his body slumped and his head rolled back. I may have hit him a bit too hard. Good morning, sunshine. Todoroki Shuto awoke, sitting up bleary-eyed and head pounding the walls of his skull. He groaned and clutched the back of his cracking neck as his vision adjusted to reveal the same heterochromatic boy that had been the one to knock him out in the first place. Somehow the headache's getting worse. Bicolored boy had his legs crossed and sitting like some anime troupe boss villain next to the bed that Todoroki had just risen from the dead from. His face seemed to forever be twisted in a condescending smirk, like he's watching a puppy with no legs on a wheelchair. It was a look that Todoroki had always hidden underneath all the nonchalance he kept up in front of his classmates. So Endeavor's masterpiece. He rested his chin in the palm of his hands and examined the slightly groggy boy. Man, he picked up a real monster, didn't he? Somewhere in the dimly lit bar, Dabi felt a shiver rack down his spine. Are you all right? Kurogyari seemed concerned by the sudden stiffening of his coworker. Yeah. I think I need another shot. Kurogyari obliged. Todoroki wondered how the mysterious boy saw past his act so quickly. His parents had realized his F-up brain only after the experiment had been complete. Fuyumi, despite her natural instincts, had figured him out after many years, but he had only ever encountered this boy a few times. He didn't even try to cover up under the boy's scrutinizing and yet somewhat uncaring gaze. He let his real smile slip through the cracks of his ruined mask. It didn't surprise him in the least that the boy mirrored his expression. Harsh heterochromatic pupils glitter like bloodied knives and metal as his smooth lips creep upward, painted on like a marionette doll. It was the same smile that he would see in the mirror every time he's alone. Who are you? His mind had only supplied this one question, willing the sharpest glare into his eyes. He silently listed down the pros and cons of revealing himself to this boy. If anything, the boy's smile only widened as he lilted out syllables, shaking Shuto to his very core. Oh sweetie, how could you not recognize your predecessor? Joan, don't scare him. A pure, teasing voice drifted into his ears and his eyes found one of his brother's friends standing by the open doorway. His emerald hair cascaded down in loose ringlets layered around his throat level. His stone-gray eyes bore into Shuto, contrasting his charming voice. The boy was slim and petite, but he had the unconscious, violet-haired boy slung on his shoulder like a sack of potatoes with zero effort. He walked by and placed the third group member on an empty bed before returning his attention to the two conscious boys in the room. His eyes were bloody cold. Shuto felt fear for the first time in his life. So, let's get down to business, shall we? Bakugo was said. Absolutely livid. His blood was boiling in his adrenaline-pumped veins. Who the F did the worthless Deku think he was? He just vanishes into FING thin air for a few flimsy years and comes back with shitty contact lenses and all of a sudden he thinks that he is better than Bakugo? Hell no. He took his irritation on the disgusting grape, much to the hidden satisfaction of the female population. He was forced to drag the gross beast to the infirmary, which he would have much rather just dumped the disgusting thing's body behind a bush and leave it to rot. But no. He stomped his way around the corner to Recovery Girl's office. Let's get down to business, shall we? It was the Deku. But his voice was so distorted, deeper, more melodic in the rhythm but not exactly in a sing-along manner. And it set him off so much. But he willed his sweaty palms to grip the collar of the half-dead grape tighter, listening to the murmuring voices behind the closed door. Someone's outside. OF dash. The greenette sneaked up on the door, sliding it open and peeking outside into the seemingly empty hall. He stalked the corridor with grace and a predatory gaze, liking every shadow and dark for the sign of another person. He could smell the sickly sweet stench in the air. Something that he has grown to loathe over the years. He could hear harsh breathing coming from inside of a broom closet. Bakugo could see the BSTRDS fake smile through the cracks of his hiding place. He was uncomfortably close. The blonde considered blasting the metallic door of its hinges, but something in his former friend's eyes told him his best bet was to stay still. The screamed bloody murder, contrary to the calm smile that played on his face. A black shadow blocked out all light seeping in through the crack of the doors. He didn't realize he had been holding his breath. He waited for around 30 seconds before moving. Kicking the door, he realized that he wouldn't budge. Realization dawned on him like a heavy blow to the face. The little sheet had locked them in a broom closet. God, sometimes I swear you're even pettier than Mr. Ice Queen over here. Shinso was chilling on the bed, fiddling with a definitely cracked iPod, sitting next to the bicolored teen who was eyeing his 2.0 with a curious gaze. As I was saying, Izuku chose to ignore this comment and instead, focusing his attention to the sad copy of Shudo, looking confused above all else. So, do you prefer Todoroki Shudo or Erasure Sora? Brief recognition slid across his face, dissipating as quickly as it came. No need to hide, dearest. We all know. The boy's eyes were still guarded, but curiosity seemed to seep into his expression almost involuntarily. How did you know? His dulled pupils narrowed, pinpointing on Izuku in particular. Izuku, in return, just walked over to a corner of the room, shoved his hand into the shadows, connecting his mind to the inside of Shudo's drawer, and pulled out a beige-colored file labeled 1837 before strolling back to the confused boy and plopping its contents onto his sheet-covered lap. Erasure flicked through the pages. His parents' demise, the police reports, any and all public appearances reported to be related, Quirk theories, physical evaluations, and even the original copy of the infamous MBTI test he had to take twice for a satisfied result, forced by his guardian. His whole history and half his passive mentality underlined in 50 pages or less. Kinda sad when you think about it, to be honest. So, since our boss ain't here, we'll just have to promote the company ourselves. Shinso cleared his throat before panning out in a completely monotonous voice. We are representatives from an underground company whose name we are not allowed to disclose to the general public. Through all the information that we have gathered from research on your background, personality, and physical attributes, we would like to offer you an opportunity to align yourself in an ally and a member of our workforce. Erasure has a ton of questions. Before you refuse, all your private information will be sold to the highest bidder to one of our offshore branches, and we cannot guarantee your safety if you are not willing to cooperate. Also, we cannot let you leave the room breathing or well at all if you are a threat or show any indication of spilling his information. Well, shit. I could just beat them to oblivion, the disconnected voice in his head piped up. This dude just choked us out with zero effort. I'd rather not see what his associates can do. Thought so. I have questions and conditions. The purple one spared him a lazy smile. Fire away. First, what kind of company is this? We are a multifunctional syndicate. Our branches are subdivided to cater to specific purposes. Our main functions are bodyguards, data analysts, bounty hunters, mercenaries, hitmen, and assassins for hire. Well, that's new. Seems interesting. Great. It's intrigued. How will this arrangement go if I do agree? The green one had managed to perch himself near the open window, his stormy gray eyes searching for nothing in the distance. You will be provided the necessary training, accommodation, uniform, supplies, and salary in exchange for your service. Your life will undoubtedly be on the line under nearly all circumstances, so the compensation after you survive every mission will be based on the predicted mortality rate of the overall task. Am I able to choose what branch I am sent to? The one that had sent him to the infirmary in the first place piped up. You will be recommended branches of occupation through logical evaluations of your psyche, quirk, strengths, and weaknesses. However, you are technically allowed to choose your own line of work as long as you're good at it. Breathe. Just breathe. The teens in front of him gave of a chilling vibe, almost like predators hidden amongst the shadows in their eyes, waiting for him to make the first move. Come on. Agree to it. What the if? Are you crazy? You'll get us both killed. But they have influence, do they not? They can give you a steady future since you're currently wasting your time with this whole hero shtick. We both know that you intend to F right off when the job is done. He did have a point. You need context to understand what's happening? Well, of course,